screen at least, so I will call this regular meeting of Council of the Municipality of Jasper to order for April 6th. Councillors, you have today's proposed agenda. Are there any additions, deletions, or other changes to be made to the agenda? Hearing none, might I have a motion, please, to approve the agenda as presented? Councillor Demota, thank you. All in favor? There are none opposed. That is carried. The minutes of the regular meeting of March 16th have been circulated. They're appended to the agenda. Are there any errors, omissions, or corrections required to be made to those minutes? Hearing none, might I have a motion, please, to approve the minutes of the regular meeting of March 16th, 2021 as presented? Councillor Journeau, thank you. All in favor? There are none opposed. That is carried. We start the meat of the agenda then today. Agenda item 4, presentations, and we have a presentation firstly from Mr. Troy Birtles, Accurate Assessment Group. I do see him now. Welcome, Mr. Birtles. Nice to see you again.
Thank you. Nice to see you as well.
I presume that you may wish to share your slide deck with us. I presume that somebody has enabled you with that capability.
I believe so. Zoom is a platform I'm not overly familiar with. I'm not exactly sure. I see it's up on Kayla's screen.
Oh. Hi, Troy. You should see at the bottom middle of your screen a green button.
Shares, the one that says share screen?
Yeah, that's the one.
Okay. So everybody sees the municipal logo there?
We do, yes.
Okay, perfect. So thank you for the opportunity to present this information to you today. As always, I believe this is a time of year that this information is of most value to you. Ultimately, how do I go? There we go. Ultimately, the purpose of the information is to give you an idea of what happened year over year from 219 assessment to 220 assessment, which of course is what your 2021 tax revenue is based off of. You've seen my presentation before, so I'm not gonna go through in great detail all of the information about our company. And of course, if you have any questions about that, feel free to ask. So I'm going to burn through this stuff pretty quick until we get to the meat of my presentation. The green municipalities are our client base. Of course, you all know our head office is in Sherwood Park. I myself am located in Whitecourt. Yeah, just some information about us. All in, we do quite a wide array of municipalities in Alberta. This is an important slide. I like to think of Accurate Assessment as a trusted advisor to the municipality of Jasper. What that means is, if you have any questions assessment related that you think you need more information on, I'd like to think that I'm the guy that you would go to. You being you yourself as council or via administration. I have a very open relationship with your team at the office there. And I think our communication is well. I just give you a quick list of staff. Just again, this might sound like I'm hitting the repeat button, but the reason I put this up here is so you understand that if I win the lottery, you're still covered. We have plenty of staff that can just jump into my shoes. Okay, so this is a broad over summary of the total assessment change from 19 to 20. So all in growth, inflation, everything all included, your residential assessment base increased by 1%. Not so attractive is the non-res assessment base decreasing by 5%, and I'll get into more details about that in a bit. Industrial, that this is your designated industrial property, is relatively insignificant in the whole scheme of things, and exempt properties, again, isn't a tax generating piece for you, so it's relatively insignificant. Overall, your total assessment base dropped by about 1%. I wanted to give you a visual of the representation of each of those sectors. So last year, you can see that your residential base was almost exactly 50% of your total assessment base. This year, with the slight increase in the residential base and the slight decrease in the non-residential base, now the overall percentage of your res is more than 50%. And this just basically presents that information in a little bit different form. You can see a nice steady increase over time on the residential. Anyways, we have gone through periods of time where the non-res has decreased, and then overall, all in, this is the first year in this chart where the total assessment base is down as a representation of the year prior. If I'm going too quickly here, please jump in and let me know if you have any questions. Okay, so this chart or graph essentially tells you that the vast majority of your properties have either slightly decreased, had no change, or slightly increased. So what that really means is there's not a huge shift, generally speaking. Obviously, there are properties that fall outside of that, and they would be site-specific scenarios. This particular chart gives a different representation, so it really does give you a visual understanding that, you know, almost all of your properties fall within that slight decrease to no change to slight increase. In fact, the more than half of them fall into that no change, which would be -1 to +1% change. From a tax shifting perspective, that's good. Now I essentially show you the same information as it represented by dollars as opposed to percentage. So almost 95% of your property decreased by 100,000 to increased by 100,000. Again, that's significant when you're thinking about tax shifting, and then a visual representation of that breakdown. So a large percentage are in that $1,000 to $10,000 increase. Lastly, with regards to assessment change, this is a simple color chart of the Jasper town site. As you can see, the darker blues are the higher increases, the darker reds are the higher decreases. You can see that there's a couple of concentrated areas of reds, primarily the non-res base. As you heard me state earlier, overall your non-res base is down by 5%. Then the lighter blues, throughout the town site are essentially those properties we just spoke about, where they're in that $1,000 to $10,000 range increase. Again, the darker the color, the more significant the change. So this is an interesting slide. It's a new slide to help you understand the distribution of the residential assessed value. So when you look at this, it breaks out the ranges. So 0 to 200,000 and 200 to 400,000. Those are your some of the co-op condo properties, some of the homes in the manufactured home subdivision. That generally captures those two categories. The 4 to 600,000 and 6 to 800,000, that is generally your town site. There's a wide range of properties in terms of value in the overall town site. So 4 to 800,000 is a fairly big difference in value, but that would be the majority of those properties. Then when you get into the 800 to $1 million, and even the $1 million to 1.2 million, those two categories would be your higher end homes that are scattered throughout the municipality. Some of the homes in Cabin Creek are getting up in that value. They're newer, a little bit bigger. And then your 1.2 and up, from a residential perspective, these would essentially be Lake Edith. In that subdivision, the land value alone is about $1.5 million. And though that range of properties obviously represents a small number of your total residential properties, I do the same for you to show the distribution of non-residential assessments. So the largest is the 0 to 500,000. So that would be primarily all of your properties that are in the industrial subdivision. They're smaller, have less market value, and is the reason why they're in that grouping. The 500 to million and million to 1.5, even up to the 2 million, the next three categories, that would be your typical commercial property in your retail areas in Connaught and Patricia. Of course, there are some in there that would be higher values, and so that would be the next couple of categories. And then easily the last, from the 3 up to the 10, the greater than 10 million, that's your hotel properties. Yeah, it's without a doubt, the majority of those are hotel based properties. This slide just gives you a little bit of an understanding of new parcels and development permits. Usually they correlate. It's not very common in Jasper to have a new parcel due to subdivision. You can see 1 year there, it really jumps out, 2019 at 66 new parcels. Well, that's because the Aspen Garden property condominiumized. So it essentially goes from 1 parcel to 60 some odd parcels. So that's why that number is so high and looks to be such an outlier. Number of development permits, as you're aware, I get all this information from Parks Canada. And so this is just basically a reflection of that. So just to give an overview by subdivision. So your residential town site increased a little bit, Cabin Creek, a couple percent, Stone Mountain 5%. And this is all based on market transactions. And I have a slide coming up that'll get into more detail about that. And you can see here that your commercial areas are down that 5%. Lake Edith is down a hair. Overall change down that 1% that I noted at the beginning. So this slide tells us why the last slide is where it is. So ultimately what we're looking at, if you look at the residential town site, you can see there were 28 sales in the year leading up to July 1st, 2020, which is what the audit of the province uses to qualify our assessments. The median assessment to sales ratio is 97.4%. As you've heard me say in the past, the median must be between 95 and 105. And so that median ASR, as it reflects the current assessment, you'll see every one of the areas noted there fall within that statistical allowance. Then if you move over to the far right column, the median ASR considering sales after July 2020. So that would be sales we will be using for next year's assessment, in addition to any sales that have occurred since this data was prepared leading up to July 2021. So all those sales will be used for next year. So if I were to hit the button today for the next year's assessment, the residential town site, we would have 19 sales and we would meet the standard, being just over the 95% threshold. However, in Cabin Creek, you'd see that the 2 sales that occurred, I would be shy. So what this is telling me is that if the same market trend were to continue through to July 2021, I would have to increase the assessments in Cabin Creek more to meet the standards from the province. The same could be said for Stone Mountain, being just under the 95%. The mountain co-ops would meet the standards, as would all the rest of the subdivision noted there. The purpose for including this information is just to give you an idea of trend analysis. You know, what's being that the assessments are a year behind, what are we looking at for next year? Okay, so some notable changes. So the hotels, as you saw on one of these slides previously, represent the upper end values of all your properties. The general formula for calculation of the hotel properties is value equals net operating income divided by cap rate. That's essentially the income approach. Leading up to COVID, the hotel industry in Jasper was noticing strong values, strong revenues, low vacancies or high occupancies. All those things led to increased market values. Again, this is leading up to COVID. Now, historically, we've found that things can happen that will affect 1 year's worth of income data drastically. So to combat huge spikes in value and huge declines in value, the assessment community in the province has generally accepted a weighted average over a 3-year period, so that those spikes and valleys are rounded to a degree. We've employed this theory in Jasper for many, many, many years. It's not anything new that we decided to implement because of COVID, but COVID is an exact example of why this is in place. In other words, had we relied only on the current year's data, the hotel assessments would have dropped far more than they did. But because we have a blended 3-year average, we were able to mitigate that loss. The same can be said when, you know, things turn around and revenues go through the roof. We're not just going to jump on the wagon and increase assessments just because in that current year things are good. We throw it over a 3-year period to reflect that averaged or weighted income. So overall, your hotel sector decreased by 9% as compared to the total non-residential decrease of 5%. So you heard me say earlier that shifting is minimal this year. Well, when you look more detailed at your non-res base, shifting might be a bit more of an issue for you as it relates to hotels versus everything else. You've lost about 35 million in assessed value just on the hotels alone. So now when I talk about the rest of the non-res assessment base, so the retail and office and industrial type properties, the valuation approach is the same. It's value equals net operating income divided by cap rate. But it's more related to rental rates. So in a hotel, the real estate is the business. Without the rooms to rent, without the accommodations and all that stuff, there is no business, there is no assessment. On the other hand, on the retail properties, the business is the rental. It's not how many t-shirts they sell or how many hamburgers they sell. It's how much does a business owner pay to occupy that property. So those rental rates are generally a longer term lease, like a 5-year up to a 25-year perhaps. And that is why there's no need for the weighted average on this type of asset, is because it's already built in the lease that they have signed. So when we look at the non-res base, excluding the hotels, the assessment base decreased by 2% as compared to the total decrease of 5%. So that's what I meant when I said shifting within this assessment class. All in, your non-res is down 5%, but your hotels are down almost 10%, and the rest of the non-res is only down a couple of percent. So you folks are the experts on tax rates and how you calculate those. I give you this information knowing that if the general theory or rationale is that the non-res assessment base is down 5%, therefore we need to increase the tax rate by 5% to create the same amount of revenue, the hotel part and the rest of it will see a different impact on their tax bill. So moving forward, part of our annual obligation is to re-inspect the municipality within a 5-year period. So we break that down into what we call like 20% re-inspections. So last year we concentrated on the Cabin Creek area. This year is more concentrated on the non-res areas. And so one of the things that we're implementing this year for the 2021 assessment year is the residential request for information. So some of you that live in the Cabin Creek area would have received the letter from Accurate Assessment. And this letter essentially is another way that we are able to collect information from property owners. It's a little bit more sensitive with COVID being in our lives these days. For example, if I were to walk up to someone's door and knock on it and ask a bunch of questions and do an interior inspection during COVID, I might be met with a baseball bat. So this mail out is I think going to be a good way to collect some otherwise uncollectible information. And at the end of the day, all it is doing is allowing us to ensure that the assessment data is correct or as accurate as it can be. So moving forward, every year we hold an assessment open house, and that gives your ratepayers an opportunity to come speak with me if they have any questions or concerns about the assessment. We held that on March 2nd. It was a very slow day, but I think COVID had a lot to do with that. People didn't really want to be meeting in public, and that's fair. Of course, council presentation today to present you with this information. I noted in the last slide my plans for the reinspection cycle and discussed the residential RFI letters that were mailed. I should note on those letters, they have 3 options to submit the data. They have the ability to log in with a secure survey key and information for their property, and they can go online and fill it out, or they can fill out the form on paper and email it to me or drop it off at the municipal office. As always, we review all new permits and any previous permits that weren't completed received from Parks Canada. We monitor values annually, continually, to ensure that we meet the standards set by the province. And before I close, a couple of just interesting tidbits. You know, a year ago when COVID first came part of our lives, people thought that market values were going to tumble. They thought things were going to be worthless. From a residential perspective, that simply did not happen. Didn't happen in Jasper, didn't happen in any other areas of the province that I work in. Jasper is not a one-off in that regard. On a non-residential basis, it is very consistent with the rest of the province that we work in. A common message is the lodging sector saw big decreases. Some of the areas I work in saw much greater decreases for hotels than Jasper did. So, you know, that's part of our moving forward is monitoring how COVID is affecting things in all aspects of the assessment. And that's my presentation. I encourage any questions anyone has for me.
Thank you, Mr. Birtles. I wonder whether you could stop sharing the screen so I can see councillors, and then I can direct questions to you. And I see first Councillor McGrath. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Birtles, for your excellent presentation this morning. I have one question, and it's in relation to the retail sector and with what the retail sector, the building owners are assessed by is the rent that they bring in. Should landlords have given breaks to their lessees, or if there's vacant commercial space within their building, that reduces in a decreased assessed values from what I'm understanding?
That's right. So like I said, the overall formula is value equals NOI divided by cap rate. Well, the net operating income is calculated by effective gross, which means 100% occupied at full rent, less a typical vacancy rate, less some normal non-recoverable expenses. So if the vacancy rate has increased because of COVID or for any reason, that would increase a deduction off the effective gross. And if some of the non-recoverable expenses have increased because of COVID or any other reason, that too would reduce the net operating income. So in the scenario of the 2020 assessment, we've increased those allowances a little bit, and that's ultimately why we are seeing the 2% reduction in the retail part of the assessment base. Of course, we have to all bring it all back together in the end with the cap rate. Well, that comes from sales. And you know as well as I do, there are very few sales of non-residential property in Jasper. But the most recent transactions do fit with the cap rate that we are applying. So yes, to answer your question, vacancies and non-recoverables do impact assessed values.
Thank you for that. Councillor Jernot.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Troy, again for a fine presentation. My question is to do with kind of the summary you mentioned at the end and how the rest of the province is, how do we fit in the rest of the province? I would suspect that in lots of areas that have oil-related activity, that their valuations are going to go down, and while ours is going to be steady. Do you foresee, or I foresee anyways, the possibility that when it comes to the equalized assessment for payment of education funding, you see our share, I believe our share will be increasing in that area as opposed to a lot of rural Alberta. Do you have any comment on that, please?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll compare to my two largest urban centers, being the city of Spruce Grove and the city of Leduc. In both of those cases, they're very active in terms of new growth. So when I exclude new growth from the residential discussion in those municipalities, the change in assessment year over year was a 2, not quite 3% reduction, as compared to Jasper, where we saw a slight increase in residential values, right? So from an equalized perspective, I mean, that's the whole reason why the province does equalization is to try to put municipalities on the same playing field. How that's going to impact your school rec, that's a really good question. Really, the equalization has more to do with the overall rate, the overall median. So you saw my one slide where I represented the different areas of the municipality and how they were 97.8% or 96.9% or whatever those numbers were. So the allowance is between 95 and 105. So I could feasibly I could run the bottom of it and go 95.1% as my median and pass all tests of audit. But then what the province does is takes your assessment base and divides it by that 95.1% to increase it. And now that increased number is what they call the equalized assessment. Then they do that for all of the municipalities to reflect the equalized number. So it doesn't really have an impact in terms of the overall value. It's more how the assessment base falls within that quality standard. Now, this isn't an easy topic. The equalization is quite complex. It really does, though, come down to what does the province require for schooling from Jasper? They take that number, divide it by your equalized assessment, and that's your tax rate, right? And they do the same for all other municipalities. Just because an area might see a reduction in market value as compared to an increase in market value in Jasper doesn't mean that you're going to be paying more school tax to the province. Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
Your Worship, if I could, just
Yes, Mr. Given.
Yeah, to Councillor Jeannot's question, I can report the provincial budget obviously impacts this as well. The province announced that they were going to be freezing the education requisition at 2.5 billion for a second consecutive year. So the province has announced that they're going to maintain the amount that they're asking from municipalities and essentially from a provincial property tax at that $2.5 billion level. So that's at least one benefit. They're not proposing to increase it. And in their provincial fact sheet, and Troy, you may know more about this, but they suggest that for the purposes of the province's equalized assessment, they're actually using 2019 values, is at least what I see reflected in the provincial information. And so I think certainly the impacts of COVID won't be reflected for the purposes of the provincial equalized assessment based on the information that I'm seeing. And I don't know, Troy, if I'm correct in that.
I would agree with that, yes.
Thank you.
Other questions for Mr. Birtles? Mr. Birtles, I had a couple of questions. Obviously, the 2021 taxes are based on the 2020 assessment. You used a date in your presentation of July 21st, I think, for sales. Is that a date that demarks the annual calculation of assessments? In other words, if we look at income producing properties, so the non-residential, what is the year that's used to make that calculation? Is it the calendar year 2020, or is it some other year, say July 21st of one year to July 21st of the next year?
Great question. So the legislation has a few different dates. The 2021 tax year is based on the market conditions as of July 1st, 2020. So what that means is the province, when they audit my assessments, any sale that occurred July 1 and on, July 1, 2020 and on, isn't even noted whatsoever in their audit at all. So that tells us as assessors, we need to look at the year from July 1st, 2019 to July 1st, 2020. And that's really the sales data that we are concentrating on. So when you refer to income producing properties, in a perfect world, that's the year's worth of data we are referring to. Now, not every company or property owner has the ability to segregate those stats for that particular time frame. So we will accept anything that they supply us. Common data would be calendar year. Larger properties do have the ability to put in a year to date and provide that information, like hotel properties generally give us the July 1st to July 1st data, which is good. So, when you think about that, we really only had March, April, May, and June as negative influencers as it relates to COVID on stats. So then next year on a hotel property with the 3-year weighted, we have those 4 months plus an entire 12-month period. So I'm not overly confident that we're going to see increases in the hotel sector next year. I am hopeful that they are performing well or better than expected. So that might offset part of it. I certainly do see other municipalities I work for having no hope in the hotel sector. But, in Jasper, thankfully, the ski hill was allowed to be open, and that brought people to town. And I'm hopeful, but did that answer your question? So July 1st, 2020 is the valuation date.
That's very helpful. Yes, I'm just thinking about property owners, particularly non-residential property, who their own lived experience is a greater drop in income than what is reflective. But you've indicated there's both the weighted average, but there is also the lag that the information is only capturing a portion of last year, not full years. So their experience will be different than what you present, but there's an explanation, and it gives us pause to consider what we're going to be facing next year in terms of assessment. That's right.
And I continue to separate hotels from the rest of the non-res base. I'll share a quick story with you. At the beginning of COVID, I spoke with a retail property owner, and his outlook was quite grim. He stated that, you know, he didn't know what was going to happen. None of us did at the time. His comments were that in previous times of poor economics in Jasper, the rest of Alberta usually stepped up and helped out and brought things back in line. But his comments at the time were, I just don't know if that's going to happen this time. We really don't know, and we're not overly confident. Then several months later, I spoke with him again. It was in the fall of 2020, and I said, "Oh, by the way, how did you know, you made these comments? How did things turn out?" And he said, "You know what, Troy? Surprisingly well. We did have a lot of Alberta influence in Jasper this year, and thankful for it. Of course, the international travel was down, but you know, visits to Jasper were good. So that's encouraging from the non-res side of things. So hopefully that continues."
Thank you for that. I had one further question, but I'm happy to defer to other councillors who have not yet asked a question. Councillor Butler.
Thanks very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Birtles, for your presentation. Very informative, as always. I have a question relating to one slide that you showed. It was the distribution of non-residential assessed values.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, it's difficult if you're not sharing screens, but what I'm wondering there is that we see, and I think these are raw numbers, so we see 85 non-residential assessments in the $0 to $500,000.
That's right.
range. We see 34 in the $500,000 to $1 million range. What I'm wondering is, Jasper has a lot of commercial businesses operating out of residential properties, and I'm wondering where those non-residential revenue producing
Good question.
portion, where they sit in that graph.
I should have clarified that point. So when I created that graph, I didn't want the numbers to be skewed. As you know, there are 100 or more private home accommodations that have a portion of their total assessment as non-res. So that stat looked at the primary use of the property and said, is it residential or non-residential? So all of the private home assessments. So for example, you have an assessment of $1 million and 10% of it is assessed as commercial and 90% of it is as residential. That $1 million assessment fell in the non-res chart. So your non-residential one that you're looking at there, Councillor Butler, with the 85 in that low range, none of those are private home accommodations because the primary use is a residential property. It would have doubled the number of commercial properties to include it, and would have been very lopsided. The data would have been lopsided. So that's why I chose to represent it the way I did. If you have questions about anything in more detail regarding that, by all means, I'd be happy to provide an answer.
Thanks very much, Mayor Ireland. May I follow up? I have probably two more questions.
Yes, go ahead.
So I understand that. Thank you. We have a number of properties now in the downtown core where we have retail or other commercial undertakings on the main level, and then often the second level, and this is due to Parks Canada's land use regulations. The second floor will be residential. So you may have a building that is 50% residential on the second floor and 50% main floor being commercial. How do you assess those kinds of buildings, and where would they fall into that graph?
Good question. So the primary use of one of those properties would be considered non-residential, and it would fall in the non-residential graph. The assessment of it would be the income approach of the retail area would be as non-res, and then the income approach of the residential area would be as residential. So say, for example, there were 4 rental units in the second floor and they rented for $850 a month. You know, you apply effective gross income, allow for vacancy, and reduce for standard expenses and whatnot. But in those 2 charts, those properties would fall in the non-res chart.
Okay, thanks. And when you're assessing a building like that, would the division or the segregation between non-residential and residential essentially be according to the floor space of the building?
No, it would be according to the income generating ability. So 2,500 square foot footprint. Okay, 2,500 square foot main floor and 2,500 square foot second floor. The main floor might collect $30 a square foot rent. You value that out through the process, come up with a net operating income for the main floor. The second floor might have 2 or 3 residential units that would rent for $1,000 a month. You go through the formula with that and calculate a value accordingly. It would not be a 50-50% relationship.
But would that building that you just described, notionally 2,500 square feet on a floor, would it have 2 assessment components, one residential and one non-residential?
Yes.
It would. Okay. But what about then the case of a residence which has, say, 25% of the floor space in the house is allocated to a business, a private home accommodation?
It would have the same residential and non-residential assessment class applied. It's more based on the number of room rentals as opposed to the percentage of square footage. That's the current approach anyways. There's nothing saying we couldn't employ a different methodology if that was deemed to be more appropriate. Percentage of floor space could be one.
So if there were to be a different methodology, where would that direction come from? Is that a decision that an assessor would make? What is the appropriate methodology in a case like that, and in a community with a relatively large number of home-based businesses, or would the direction for that come from somehow from the community or from council?
Well,
ultimately, we obviously don't tell you what methodologies to use in preparing your. That would be wrong. Generally, you have your provincial requirements and stipulations to adhere to. So in a case like that, as you said, a different methodology could be used. Where would the direction for that methodology come from?
It generally would be industry best practice. I believe the current methodology that's employed in the assessment process for private home accommodations was one that come together with the assessor at the time and administration. And so it was agreed to that the percentage that we apply to these would be done in such a manner. There's no spot in the act that says you must assess based on square footage or number of rooms or whatever the case is. The legislation simply says the assessor must place a value on a property based on market value, and the assessor must apply an assessment class to the assessment. So the assessment classes are residential, non-residential, farmland, or machinery and equipment. We know it's not farmland, we know it's not machinery equipment, so therefore there's residential and non-residential options. Now, okay. I know this is a big thing, and discussion on it is encouraged, absolutely. And when I speak to best practice, I would reach out to my colleagues in the province to see how they might interpret this type of property. And in fact, I did that. And in Banff, they don't apply a commercial rate to any of their private home accommodations. And that's their choice. I'm not really sure why they're doing that, or you know, and
Okay,
it just is how they approached it.
all right, that helps. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. And thanks again for the presentation. I always look forward to it every year.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Councillor Butler. Mr. Given.
Thanks, Your Worship. But just to add to what Troy shared with respect to PHAs and that split of residential versus non-residential assessment, my understanding of our current system, it is absolutely something, as Troy suggested, is within council's control. I think the intent of a dialogue about PHAs, this is a part of the overall picture. And Councillor Butler, on what we'd more readily recognize as a commercial property in the downtown core, like Troy described, with 2,500 square feet of commercial on the main floor and 2,500 square feet of residential on the top. Essentially, that would break into a 50-50 split. I think I heard Troy describe. In a home, the current system sees a 3-bedroom private home accommodation setup. In a house which may occupy up to 48% of the floor area, that property is only assessed at 10% commercial. So you know, there's a pretty big disparity between how a property on Patricia Street that would have a mix of uses, let's say, of commercial and residential, is treated, and how our currently self-imposed, to be very clear, this is a chosen system by Jasper, treats private home accommodations, which could have up to 48% of the floor area in the property dedicated to what is arguably a commercial use. And so I think that that's the type of policy decision that council will need to consider at some time about whether whether that system makes sense for Jasper going forward, or if there are other ways to address the very complex issue of private home accommodations. But I would suggest that assessment is a part of the issue, but not the only issue by any means.
If I might add just a little bit of clarification, thank you for that. The example of the 2,500 square foot main floor, 2,500 square foot second floor residential, main floor retail isn't 50-50 split. While you were speaking, I pulled the property up on Connaught. That is just that, main floor retail, second floor residential. Again, the main floor calculation is based on the rental rate of retail space, and the second floor calculation is based on the rental rate of apartment style use. And so in this particular example, I have an assessment of just over $1 million, and a quarter of it is the residential and 3/4 of it is the non-residential. Hopefully that might provide a little more insight as to compare the two different kinds of properties.
Go ahead, Councillor Butler.
Sorry, thank you very much. And thanks, Mr. Given, also for that perspective. I agree with you. But Mr. Birtles, you said a quarter of it was residential and 3/4 was non-residential. In that example, do you mean a quarter of the assessed value?
That's right.
Or
that's right.
Okay, thank you.
That's just one example. I just was scrolling through and I found one that had residential second floor, and that.
Yeah, I understand. It's just an example. Thank you.
Councillor Journeau.
Just a small minor question. So in the total number of properties, you have 1,407. The example that you just gave, is that 2 properties, or does that still remain 1 property? Thank you.
Property, yep.
Mr. Birtles, I have one question based. Oh, I'm sorry, Councillor Demota. Did I see your hand flash up?
No, that's fine. Go ahead.
Thank you. The slide that you have, the assessment history comparison, a bar graph. It's page 15 of my agenda package. It's about 9 pages into your presentation, I think. It's right after the pie chart.
Okay, I'm just pull it up here. Right after the pie chart, so the multicolored.
Yes.
Okay, yeah.
So this may take a bit of interpretation on your part, but I noticed the yellow bar graph, so that's the non-residential, dipped after 2008 and then slowly recovered. I might guess that was as a consequence of the economic collapse in 2008.
100%.
And that low dip and gradual rise might be an indication then of the weighted 3-year average, which would have been applied back then as well, I gather. Is that what we might be able to expect? And I'm not trying to turn you into a prognosticator rather than an assessor, but is that what we might anticipate in the future? That is, the weighted average would cushion the decrease, but then also cushion the increase in later years once the recovery is upon us.
That's correct. But for clarification, that 3-year weighted is only used on hotel properties.
Right.
Right.
Okay.
But that is exactly correct. As we grow through this downfall and things, if we rub the crystal ball and think and understand that things are going to go incredibly well, if that's our prediction, the 3-year weighted average helps to mitigate that sharp peak in that example.
Thank you for that. Councillor Demota.
Thank you, thank you, Mayor Arlen. Through you to Mr. Birtles. Nice to see you again, Troy. Look forward to it every year, and thank you for the information that you gave us. Again, I'm really surprised at how many residential housing units fall in the under $200,000 category. And you're saying that that's all the co-op style condos that are in?
Not all of them. Some of them are certainly higher than the 200,000.
Yes, but all of them that are in that category, are they condos? Are they in the co-op?
There's also I don't know if you're familiar with the horse paddocks up at Pyramid.
Oh,
there's individual assessments of a whole bunch of different horse stalls. They're very low assessments. They're not a commercial assessment. They fall into that category. It kind of skews things a little bit as well.
Horses don't pay enough taxes.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that
okay. So that makes way more sense now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry if I forgot that. Okay. So I still get brought up the arguments that co-op style condominiums take up a similar footprint and have the same draw on municipal services as condominium units that get assessed on fair market value. So there is a difficulty in the argument where other residents say that people that are living in co-op condos aren't helping the community carry their fair share weight on the services, because the street outside costs the same as the street outside of each place. They're the same garbage cans, the same thing, and so are the services applied to it. Like, we don't get where I live in one of the co-op style condos, and the services we get provided are the same as somebody that's in Stone Mountain. So
right.
I know before you gave clarification on why it's difficult to have those services addressed the same as far as how a municipality is able to tax on those services.
Yes, so the Municipal Government Act affords a municipality the ability to have a bylaw to create residential subclasses. So you as the municipality could have a residential tax rate, a residential condominium tax rate, a residential co-op condominium tax rate if you wanted. It does not afford you the ability to do that on the non-residential side. There have been many scenarios in other clients that I've worked for that have the residential rate and a condominium rate. And interestingly enough, the condo rate in some cases had been lower than the main rate, and in some cases had been higher than the main residential rate. But now every municipality that I work for that has that separate condo rate is the same rate as the main residential. Now, I don't think that's addressing your question. I think your question is more related to, an assessment of a co-op being at, say, 200,000 and at a non-co-op being at 500,000. Obviously, the non-co-op pays a considerably more amount of taxes. From an assessment perspective, I answer based on my requirement to assess property at its market value. So the full definition says property is to be assessed at market value at fee simple interest. So what the fee simple interest means is you have the full bundle of rights. You can use your property, you can rent your property, you can change your property, you can do a bunch of different things to it. You can do nothing with it. It can be argued that the co-op properties don't have the full bundle of rights. They're limited in how they sell the property, right? You know, if you want to put your property up for sale, you know exactly what you'll get for it because it's controlled by the CPI. Versus in Stone Mountain, you want to sell your property, you're gonna play the market and you're gonna hope to get as much as you can. So in the co-op scenario, is that really fee simple? That's a hard question. Depends on what side of the fence you're sitting on, right? Because market value is market value. Market value is what somebody's willing to pay for your property and what somebody's willing to sell your property for. And if that number is controlled, is that still considering the market value of it at fee simple, right? And my take on it is that the legal constraints in the sale price is deeming that to be a factor that needs to be required in terms of market value, calculating market value. Jump way ahead to the crux of your question, is that fair in terms of taxation? Well, I pass the buck to you because you do have the ability to have a different tax rate for that type of property. From an assessment perspective, its market value is what I'm controlled by. So it's a difficult conversation. I'm sure if you filled a room full of people and half were condo owners and half weren't, you would have a clear split on how it should be addressed, right?
Yeah, no, but it's worth to have the discussion over, and I'm not for the rest of the people watching and the rest of council, my intention is not to pursue trying to double condo taxes by any means, but when we're looking at what's fair and equitable to everybody collectively, then those conversations do have to come into play, because we often get questioned on the overall equity, particularly when it comes to residential contribution to our operation. So, and then when we've gone to the province and asked for tools to help us, in regards to being in a resort municipality, we've often been asked, what are you doing within your community to maximize your revenues, and whether you have alternate sources of revenue, or using what you have available to maximize your services. So yeah, I appreciate how you walked us through that, and it's more clear now than it has been. So thank you for walking us through that again, and again, thank you for the info.
You're welcome.
Thank you all for that. I joined with Councillor Demota in expressing my appreciation to find out that the paddocks up at the Cottonwood Corral are part of the assessment. I should have known that, but it never came to mind previously. So that's an interesting tidbit for sure. All right, thank you again, Mr. Birtles, for an excellent presentation, most timely as we go into to other discussions that we will need to have about tax rates and other matters. So thank you again. Appreciate the presentation, and appreciate the fact that you remain available to answer questions that might arise later. So thank you very much.
Anytime. Yep, you're most welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, we can move along to agenda item 4.2. And I think I can turn that to you, Mr. Given, for a very happy recognition.
Yes, Your Worship. We have a work anniversary that was celebrated recently, and as being new to the municipality, I wanted to check and see what our policy said on long service recognition. And I went into the policy and realized that we have a long service recognition that wasn't contemplated in the policy. Kathleen Waxer has been with the municipality of Jasper for 35 years now, and recognizing that there was no guidance on how to manage that kind of recognition, and considering how much she has contributed to the community in her role over those years, I thought it was appropriate to bring this to council's attention in the public forum, and provide my thanks to Ms. Waxer for her contributions to the municipality of Jasper, to our organization, and to the leadership team of the municipality. She is an invaluable resource, I think, that has continued to help Jasperites at every stage of their life through the unique approach that she's developed here that really has had a lasting impact on many, many people's lives. And really, you could almost say over probably a couple of generations of youth who have experienced Jasper through the lens of services that Ms. Waxer has developed in her 35 years. So, Your Worship, I just wanted to bring that to council's attention. I would maybe turn it over to you if there is anything that you wish to say in recognition of Kathleen, but certainly my congratulations and thanks to her.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Given. Thank you for putting this on the agenda. It is an important milestone. And if I might, I see Mrs. Waxer is there. If she could turn on her camera, barring any embarrassment she might feel. I did have some remarks, and I'd like to address them a little more personally. So, Kathleen, if you're there. There she is. So Kathleen, I just wanted to join Mr. Given and the rest of municipal staff in offering on my behalf, also on behalf of council, our congratulations on having achieved this really most impressive milestone. I think it's fair to say that your career, which is now marked by impressive longevity, has more importantly also been a career continually marked by your own brand of innovation, your trend setting, your inspirational leadership. I think it's safe to say that your legacy is already well established in the people you have mentored and in the systems that you've created in the community. You've been a role model locally, inspiring a new generation of community leaders. And your innovative approach has been noted, it's been acclaimed, and in some instances it's been implemented, not just locally, but at the provincial level, and not just in this province. I think in today's jargon, you're an influencer, and you've had a really positive influence locally and beyond. You also have the distinction of having served with every director and for every municipal manager and CAO that the municipality of Jasper has ever had. Your depth of institutional knowledge and history is absolutely unmatched. And as Mr. Given said, when it's viewed through your lens of really insightful, outcomes-oriented, inclusion-focused systems analysis, it is beyond value and absolutely irreplaceable. So Kathleen, after 35 years of service, I offer congratulations and gratitude, and I am not suggesting any more work on your plate, but instead I am expressing absolute confidence that while you remain with us, you'll find some way to add to your already impressive resume and your legacy by finding some way to impart all of that valueless knowledge that you have gained in service of this community. We could not have done better. Thank you so much. And ride this out. We'll see how many years after 35 we'll have to amend the policy to congratulate you again. But on behalf of council, thank you very much. I see applause. I hope you see it as well. And go ahead, Kathleen, the floor is yours.
I just wanted to say that I'm so very, very grateful for having a career that even after 35 years is absolutely endlessly fascinating, engaging, stimulating, and challenging. This past year, for sure, has brought challenges that none of us could possibly have anticipated. But I'm so very proud of the social supports that my department has been able to provide to residents in this difficult time. And I would highlight that even this weekend, with cases rising, there was need for people to socially isolate, and the funds we had applied for back in September came in handy to be able to provide a safe place for people who shared accommodations with others to isolate safely. I also wanted to express appreciation to council and the CAOs past and present, which have given me the latitude to adapt and change the municipality and how the municipality responds to social issues. And it's given me the opportunity to ensure that we have the most meaningful and relevant supports developed for Jasper, that are specifically for Jasper, that make sure that they're in place. I want to express extreme gratitude to my team. Each of them brings such incredible strengths and talents that every day offset my weaknesses. The passion that I have for this work is a testament to the amazing community we live in, and the workplace I've had the opportunity to work in. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Kathleen. Happy to see you honored in this way and recognized in this way. And unfortunately, we missed your birthday by one day, but happy birthday as well. All right, thank you all for that. Agenda item 5, business arising. Is there any business arising from previous minutes? I see nothing. Agenda item 6 is department reports. There is nothing scheduled. Nothing has been added. Mr. Given. We have bylaws. Agenda item 7, simply a summary for information, which takes us to agenda item 8, request for decision. I'm anticipating that agenda item 8 will take some time. Rather than interrupt that time, I am going to suggest that we have a brief recess for the comfort of councillors and for the comfort of those members of the public and staff who are tuned in. I now have 10:47, so let's give ourselves 10 minutes and we will reconvene at 10:57. Do what you must, and we'll come back and commence with agenda item 8.1 at 10:57. I now have 10:58, and with respect to all of those who are watching, we will continue. I assume that Councillor Keller-Harampe will re-emerge here briefly. We are on to agenda item 8.1, a request for decision regarding commercial use of public space bylaw and the sidewalk seating fee amendment that has been proposed. So Mr. Given, I turn it to you for presentation to council.
Yes, thank you, Worship and Council. As you'll remember, this was held over from our last committee of the whole meeting. It wouldn't be my intention that we would be bringing RFDs to council for decision. This was here previously, but we went quite long in that last committee of the whole meeting. And so that's why this arrives here on the regular council agenda. I would hope that council members have had a chance to see the report and consider it. It has been out in the public forum for a couple of weeks now. And so I would hope that whatever council may decide, that we would be able to move forward with a decision today. That said, I'll just provide a brief overview of the report, recognizing again that it has been in your hands for some time. And I would like to point out that the report is very specific, that the only update that we're looking to the bylaw is with respect to the fees. Administration is not asking for any changes to the bylaw. We have worked very closely with the Chamber of Commerce, who have been advocating on behalf of their members and affected businesses to see more flexibility in the program. And I can address some changes that we've done, but just to be clear, those changes are within the administrative scope of the delivery of the program and don't necessitate any changes to the bylaw. So council's attention should be on the fees. And really the essential question here is, what is the appropriate compensation for the use of public property that would be necessitated in a program like this? That's the essential question here. But I know that council may be interested in the operation of the program. And so if I can do that without taking your attention from where it should be on the fees, I'll just very briefly describe some of the changes that came as a result of our discussion with the Chamber of Commerce. We heard loud and clear that the program needed to start early and earlier than it did last year because the participants felt that they were behind the 8 ball in terms of responding and recognizing that it was an uncertain situation. Last year, we have the ability to be more certain this year, and administration has heard that loud and clear. And that's why the application form is out, available to businesses that might wish to participate. They can start to submit their application, and appreciate the Chamber of Commerce highlighting the importance of getting that out early. Another change that we heard and acted on was the need to be less prescriptive while still maintaining the essential outcomes that we're looking for. And specifically, we heard as the Chamber of Commerce applied to PDAC for their renewal for this year, PDAC identified a few conditions: that site design should consider measures to mitigate the impacts to pedestrian safety, accessibility and adjacent uses, while incorporating aesthetic elements reflective of the mountain town character and setting of Jasper. So that's a direct quote from the PDAC decision on the 2021 program. And so we had to find some way to identify those objectives without, I think in an ideal world, without being overly prescriptive and saying you must do exactly this, which can stifle innovation and impact business operators from adjusting their patio seating in a way that would be in character with their business. So what administration did was to take a outcomes-based approach, where we have essentially described what we're looking for patio seating, and I am focusing on patio seating by and large in this report, and I'll address why in a minute. But really what we've said is there are some essential do's and don'ts, and there are probably many different ways you can accomplish these do's and don'ts, and it's up to you to choose how to accomplish them, and we will judge whether or not you have met the standard that we need. So for example, some of these do's are pretty direct and easy to measure. Ensure a clean, unimpeded pedestrian pathway of no less than 2.4 meters clearance is maintained. That is very objective and easy to determine. Ensure the chosen pedestrian pathway does not present or create additional barriers for persons with limited mobility. Now, that's an example of something that there are likely multiple different ways to achieve that outcome. Another example is to include barriers that provide protection against vehicles in the parking lane entering the pedestrian pathway or seating area. So that's another example, and I'll use the Connaught developments. I think everybody last year was familiar with the areas where we use Jersey barriers. There's a lot of discussion in the community about that and the appropriateness of those, or how they looked. This is a recognition that there is not one way to achieve that outcome of preventing vehicles from entering into that seating area. An example could be a large boulder that would look more natural and be more reflective of our mountain town character, could achieve the same outcome as a Jersey barrier, a concrete Jersey barrier. A large flower planter or multiple large flower planters could achieve the same outcome while maybe having a better aesthetic look. Administration isn't suggesting that everyone must do the same thing. We're saying the outcome that we're looking for is safety. Show us how you will ensure that this is safe. And recognizing that PDAC has suggested that we need to incorporate aesthetic elements that are reflective of our mountain town character. We have a do, or an objective, that says advance the mountain town character and setting of Jasper by conforming to the intent of the Parks Canada architectural motif through the use of natural materials and muted colors as much as possible, while limiting the use of plastic. And again, there are many different ways that somebody could do that. And it's not administration saying you must use exactly this method or exactly this material or exactly. So the approach that administration is taking, based on the advice of the Chamber of Commerce and the operators from last year, is that there needs to be more flexibility so that operators can determine their own path. We as the regulator need to ensure that the objectives and outcomes that we're looking for are met. And I believe administration's approach this year balances those two needs. And I want to thank the Chamber of Commerce for their input into the process as we've developed this. So that's a bit of an aside about what's the program going to look like this year, because I know that council will likely have some interest, and certainly the community will. We are intending, well, applications are already out, and we would shoot for a May 1st start date with the season to run until October 20th. So now I'll turn council's attention, if I can, specifically to the fees, which is what we are looking for an amendment to the bylaw on. Administration reviewed the fees and reviewed other comparables across the province in similar municipalities. And within our own municipality, how do we judge the value of public space? The best indicator, or a similar indicator, is in our bylaw, our parking authority bylaw, which has a fee for anyone who wishes to do away with a parking space on a permanent basis. And you'll see in the report that we attempted to calculate, well, what is that value of that space on a per square foot basis? And what would that work out to be? And then how would that translate into seats? The current structure of the bylaw is that there is a fee per seats of $25 per fee and a $100 application fee. Administration's proposal here is to remove the $100 application fee for patio seating applications, and to increase the per seat fee to $50. This, we believe, better reflects the actual market value as determined in a couple of different methods of that physical space, and recognizes a fair return to taxpayers who are basically foregoing the use of that public space and giving it over to a single private operator. Council, I think, fully appreciates that there are a number of different perspectives on this issue. Certainly an operator who wants to use that space would want that cost to be as low as possible, and that is reasonable and justified. Adjacent commercial operators who are losing parking, if we're talking about use of parking lanes, adjacent private operators who would be losing space would want to say, well, this impacts my business and there better be some benefit to the overall community if I'm going to lose, access of parking nearby. And then, of course, there are the general residential taxpayers who would say, are my residential taxes subsidizing a business operation? And council, of course, in its strategic priorities, has identified fiscal equity as an important driving factor to ensure that those who are benefiting from a service or facility contribute to the cost of that service or facility. Very similar to the discussion that we had about the aquatic center and fees in the aquatic center during our budget discussion. How do we ensure that people that are most directly benefiting from a service or space are contributing their fair share towards the cost of that service or space? And so administration's recommendation here is a reflection of what we believe is a reasonable market rate for the use of space based on a per seat calculation. We did also look at comparators. I should mention Banff is our closest comparator, given that they are also in parks jurisdiction and a similar tourism-based economy. In Banff, the cost per seat is $55, and Banff additionally charges a $200 per table charge. So a table of 4 in Banff would cost $420. That similar table of 4 in Jasper under our proposed fee structure would cost $200 to the operator. And these are annual fees. They're not daily or anything like that. So you can see there on at least that measure compared to our closest similar municipality, Jasper's fees are proposed, even at the increased rate, are proposed to be $220 less than they would be in Banff for a similar sort of setup. The other thing I think that's important to note, and I'm very proud of this, and again, thank the Chamber of Commerce for really driving home the point about how much time is needed for this program. Jasper's program is proposed to run for a total of 173 days, while Banff's program is proposed to only run for 100 days. And so I really believe that that provides the operators with a significant opportunity to capture some of the lost business that they may be facing as a result of reduced capacity restrictions on restaurant operators. And finally, I said that I would touch on why the focus is really on seating and those food and beverage services. It's because there's relatively low uptake in the retail sector last year. So administration is not proposing to change the fees. We are have provided some more guidance for retailers if they wish to participate. Certainly, we would like to see them continue to do so, but administration isn't proposing any changes in that area. We saw very good participation in the food and beverage sector, and so that's why we have a enhanced focus in that area, given that there's greater demand and greater administration and staff resources required to support that section of the program. With that, I think that's all I'll give for an introduction and overview. I would turn it to council for discussion and debate. You can see our recommendations at the top of the report, that council approve the changes to the fee schedule by eliminating the $100 permit fee for sidewalk seating and increasing the sidewalk seating per seat fee to $50.
Thank you, Mr. Given. I will invite questions of Mr. Given from council to begin. But once we exhaust that and get all the information we can from Mr. Given through questions, then I would invite a motion and council can debate the motion. Go ahead, Councillor Demoda.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you to Mr. Given. I appreciate the detail and the level of detail that all that was described. And more so, you know, speaking of, you know, those restaurants that may partake in the street seating aspect and losing those parking spaces. And I believe, you know, attaching a value to that, you know, when a business that's not operating as a restaurant has the potential to lose or move their customers or clientele down the street, that there needs to be some value to that. But going to the actual seat costing model itself, pre-COVID, when we just had a sidewalk seating program that was incorporated, there was a different rationale to that $25 per seat charge. And I know that with the addition of the parking stalls now adds a different value to it, but I want to argue before we get into the debate on where we want to go with this. Just if there's the ability to even discuss having 2 different fees and sticking to the original rationale, like the normal sidewalk patio seating, where areas have the 2 meters going around from the edge of their seating area to the curb, and having a separate fee for the actual use of the street seating.
I take it, Mr. Kivett, it is intended as a question directed at you. Could we have a variation of fees, one based on sidewalk seats that otherwise meet the old requirements, and one based on additional seating that might take parking space? Is that essentially the question, Councillor Demona?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Your Worship. Thanks for that clarity. So to Councillor Demota, yes, anything is possible, first off. And if we didn't make a decision fairly soon on a approach, then that could delay the startup of the program, of course, until the fee system is set up. So if we went through a couple of cycles of trying different approaches and coming back to council for approval, I'd suggest that could impact our ability to launch the program in the timely manner that businesses are looking for. Additionally, I would say that I would need to go out and do a little bit more on-site investigation to understand, even, Connaught, I mean, we can be clear. I think Connaught is where there's the widest sidewalk, in the municipality. There are some existing operations there that may be able to manage the 2.4 meters of clearance, but it would certainly impact the number of seats that they would be able to have on the sidewalk. I think there is a business that we all know that has patio tables out currently under their old approval. I would have to see whether or not that would actually meet the 2.4 meters objective that we're looking for, because certainly we are in COVID times, and the justification pre-COVID of saying, well, we're not as worried about pedestrian access or pedestrian flow and physical separation is just different now. We do need to consider that. If a business wished to have a couple of seats up against the wall and they could demonstrate that they were maintaining that 2.4 meters of unencumbered clearance, then absolutely they could do that. But it would really, I'd suggest, limit the number of seats that they'd be able to put out. And they might choose, for financial reasons, that it would be worth it for them to get a greater number of seats, even if it meant having to expand into the parking area. And so there really is an economic driver that underlies this, and a health driver, to be very clear, that there is a health driver here as well. And that's why that 2.4 meters needs to be maintained. And that would be one area where administration, and it is, you'll see in the objectives, it is the one that is most specific, because that is where administration, acknowledges that the context has really changed.
If I may just follow up. Thank you. Okay, I guess mainly my rationale would be maybe on some of the more limited businesses, those who wish to partake but can't because of where they're located, and or some that are happy with what they have and don't need to go out into their parking lanes. And my rationale would be, why would their rates be based on the same as those that partake in the street seating? So I think that's where I would only have my issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Demota. Any other questions of clarification or information from Mr. Gibbon? If not, Is there a councillor prepared to make a motion and we can begin debate? Councillor McGrath.
Thank you very much, Mayor Ireland. I will take this opportunity to discuss and thank administration for all the work they've done, specifically the work that you've done with the Chamber of Commerce. It's much appreciated to see you working together and to bringing what's best for the businesses forward. And I agree that we do have to move this forward today. Today is the day to finalize this. And with the fee-focused conversation, I believe it's very important to support our businesses. I believe that it's important to assist our businesses. And as we assist our businesses, we aid community health. We must do all we can do. Our businesses are our neighbors, they're our friends, they're our community members, and we must do all we can do to ensure their success and them staying open to serve the visitors and the residents of Jasper. The safest place to dine right now is outdoors. So I appreciate the dates of extension from May 1st to October 20th that administration is proposing. I believe that our residents want more outdoor dining and safer opportunities to dine in Jasper National Park. Therefore, I propose today that Council approve the following changes to the commercial use of public space bylaw number 193 fee schedule. Number 1, to eliminate the $100 sidewalk seating permit fee. Number 2, to eliminate the per seat fee for the 2021 season.
Thank you, Councillor McGrath. Do you wish to speak further to that motion?
No, I believe I have said everything I've needed to say, and I've expressed my values on this subject in many council meetings. I open this conversation to hear other councillors' perspectives, and I wanted to put this motion forward first and foremost so it can be debated, voted on, and if necessary, see another motion presented. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Keller-Harampi.
I cannot support the motion of no revenue. I think it's important that we have some value. Last year when we did this program, we said at the time that we will keep the fees that are in the bylaw for outdoor seating, and that anybody that couldn't pay, that we would look at it at the end. For me, I think we should just keep the same fee schedule that we have, and for 2021, it brought in $6,000 last year. At that time, we said that if anybody could not afford it, that we as a council will look at that at the end of the season, and we would adjust and work with those businesses that couldn't afford it. It looked like everybody could afford it. I think that we keep the same schedule as last year.
Thank you, Councillor Keller-Harampi. Councillor Butler.
Thank you very much. I agree with Councillor Keller-Harampi. Last year, we put in place measures intending that they would be in place for 1 year, because at that time we thought, optimistically it turns out, that COVID would be sort of a 1 year impact. Discovered that that's not the case. I think the spirit of our intent through earlier discussions was to reiterate what we did last year for another year, to allow the community to adjust and adapt to COVID, to increase or continue with increased space for pedestrian comfort and social distancing. I think what we did last year worked as well as we could and as well as we had hoped. So given that the spirit of our conversations has been, I think, to simply extend the program, I don't really see a rationale to increase fees at this time. If the intent of increasing fees is to reflect the value of a parking space, then I think that is a conversation that should be held in the context of carrying on with public outdoor dining to a greater extent in the future, if that's what council prefers to do. But if it is intended to be a COVID measure, then I think we should just reiterate what we did last year. So my preference would be simply that we maintain the current fees, and would be happy to put that motion on the table where we already have a motion on the table. So I am not in support of removing all fees. That just moves us backward, but to maintain the current fees.
Thank you, Councillor Butler. Others? Councillor Jernot?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I am not in support of waiving fees. I think that there's definite benefits to the sidewalk seating. If we waive fees, there'd be some pushback from the restaurateurs, for example, that cannot do it. Guys on the second floor, for example, they don't get that advantage. So the people who have, there's an advantage, but I think that there should be a fee. I was prepared to go along with the proposal that's been presented by Mr. Gibbon. Administration has done some good work, and it compares very favorably with our neighboring community. It is not a huge cost for the benefits that businesses will receive. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jernot. Councillor Demota?
Well, you know what? I appreciate that there's a motion on the floor and that we're having a discussion on this, because, you know, there are a lot of variables, and some people are under the belief that, you know, we should just waive it because it's easy to do. And if it was easy to do, it would have been done already. And I've said that to a few people in the community. And I want to thank everyone that participated in sending myself and other councillors and council as a whole feedback on the decision we might be making today, or hopefully will be making today. We've had a lot of things to consider, and, you know, oddly enough, it's almost split down the middle on those in favor of, to me anyway, the communication that I've been getting. So the communication, also those in favor of waiving fees, and then you know, maintaining. And I think there was only one or two that expressed that we should increase the fees, and one in particular said that maybe we're not charging enough. But weighing all those things into consideration, I think I'd have to side more with what Councillor Keller MP and Councillor Butler had stated. I'd be more into maintaining and looking at maybe waiving if you couldn't afford this summer. I think that maybe with the potential increase in visitation, with the campground, our biggest campground opening up again, there may be more people in the community. And with the way things are going, and went last summer, I think we'd be okay to maintain the status quo, because that's what we've done for COVID. And we have to understand that this is operating during a pandemic as well. And I don't want to give anybody the false sense of security in this moving forward, because we'll be at the mercy of Parks Canada, and they have control over land use and planning. So, you know, we don't know if this is going to continue. So attaching a value to what those seats might be worth now, and we need to have a separate conversation on that if we could ever do this in the future after the pandemic's over. I'd like to have that conversation, but right now I'm more in favor of maintaining the status quo. And sorry for taking that long to express that, but there's lots to consider here.
Thank you, Councillor Demota. If I may speak to the motion, and I may call eventually for division, I support the motion in the first point, that is to eliminate the sidewalk seating permit fee for this year. The rationale provided by administration, I think is appropriate. With respect to eliminating the sidewalk seating per seat fee, I am not in agreement with that. I agree with the arguments made by Councillor Keller MP and Councillor Butler that there is a value in having the fee. I think that this still qualifies as effectively a pilot project. It can be adapted. We've had 1 year. We should learn lessons from the first year, and now we're moving into a second year. I know that it is not confirmed, but there are people in the community who think this may become a permanent fixture. If we are at all moving in that direction, then I think it should be based on principles. And I think that the value to the public of that loss of space is greater than $25 per seat. So I will accept as a moving target an increase to $50 per seat on the basis that there is no upfront fee. You don't have to pay a permit fee to get in the game, and then defer payment until after the close of the season, and then have businesses show us whether or not it was a justifiable fee. I think for those who made use of sidewalk seating and parking lot seating last year, it was not a particular hardship to pay the fee that was imposed. But if it is, I'm prepared to accept that and deal with it after the fact, and for the time being, set a more reasonable fee, but recognize that that will be deferred and we'll see at the end of the season. Councillor McGrath, when you introduced the motion, you indicated support for business. And while I agree that, there are a number of businesses in the community who do not see that this measure is supportive of them at all. That is, they think the loss of any parking is a detriment to their business, and we are adding insult to injury by saying not only do we lose the parking, we don't even put a fee on it. So with respect to those businesses, I would say yes, in principle, that public space has value. Let's put a value on it, knowing that it's not fixed for all time. And then if it's a hardship to those business operators, we can waive it at a later date. So I would, in essence, support the elimination of the $100 sidewalk seating permit fee, but I would accept the recommendation, although it's not part of the motion, so I would vote against the motion to eliminate the per seat fee, and I would in fact support a motion to increase it, but defer payment and let applicants at the end of the season apply and show us what the hardship was, and then we can deal with it. It's similar to the discussion we had a week ago about setting up a fund to potentially give credits for demonstrated hardship on a targeted basis rather than one broad brush, which I think simply does not capture the many nuances of business in this community. And that, I apologize, as did Councillor Demota, for a long-winded approach to two pretty specific questions. So we have before us still a motion that is in two parts. I have not yet heard any amendment to that motion, but I would entertain a motion to amend if necessary. Otherwise, I would, for my own purposes, prefer to split the question and vote on each one separately, because I take a different position on each of them. Councillor Demota.
Yeah, I have a question for administration for some clarity. If I may, through you, sir, to Mr. Given, what type of implications would occur if we opened this up to, if anybody wanted to partake as soon as possible, as opposed to May 1st? I know that was the recommended date, but if we do have some warmer weather and people wanted to take advantage of that right away and have the opportunity, would that pose a great hindrance to our operations?
Your worship, to Councillor Demota's question, I appreciate the intent, and I would share the same desire that we get up and going as soon as possible. As I noted at the start, we're over 70 days longer than BAMP's program, even in our northern climate. And there are some practical matters there. Administration does need a time to be able to review the applications as they come in, specifically because we're allowing for more variation and alternate solutions to the objectives that we're trying to meet. If we said build build box A exactly as shown in diagram 1, and we knew that everybody was just building box A, well, then that would probably be a little bit simpler. But I have heard from businesses that are in the process of constructing specialized, sort of approaches, and there's going to be a lot of variation. Administration will need that time that is before the start of the program to assess the applications as they come in. So I wouldn't advise council that we would be in an operational position to be able to start up earlier than that. If council places the priority on those inspections that's necessary in the health context and also for the accessibility context, because there are, I'm sure council, is well aware that we need to ensure that Jasper is an easy place for visitors to get around at all times, and even more so in COVID times. And so administration will just need that space to be able to ensure that we can inspect the proposed solutions from the program participants.
So if I may continue, because May 1st lands on a Saturday, and because we're talking about maybe some amendments or another motion coming forward, because of my experience in the industry, it might be better for the operators if we're limited to having that time to maybe aim for the 29th or the 30th of April, somewhere in that window from the 28th to May 1st, so that people can get some cobwebs out, get their servers trained to use that again. They're going to have new staff, and just to get a few of the startup issues out of the way, because those often do happen. And I think just to say go ahead full blast on Saturday, I'm not sure we'll be at full capacity in our community. However, it might be a little harder to do that, even administratively, if because we don't really have full operations over the weekend anyways. Just a suggestion. If that's too hard to do, I understand, but I think a couple of days might help the businesses out that participate.
Thank you, Councillor Butler, and then Councillor Journeau.
Thank you very much. I agree that our decision needs to be principle-based, and I think we had that discussion quite robustly a year ago. I don't agree with eliminating the permit fee, because the permit has value in the sense that it is something that takes time on the part of administration, as Mr. Given has pointed out. It requires oversight. It requires time and attention from bylaw. There should be a fee for the permit. It shouldn't be excessive under the current COVID conditions. So $100 is, while minimal, I think it's important that out of principle, such things should be paid for. Permit is a flat amount, whether you're putting out one table or 20 tables, and I think it makes sense. And again, I don't see the rationale for increasing the fee this year if the intention is to reflect fair value for seating. Then administration has pointed out that that value probably is 200 or much more potentially per parking space, so or per seat. So a seat fee of $50 doesn't really accomplish that anyway. So really, again, I think we should just maintain the current fees, and whether we split the vote or not, I find I just don't see a reason to go anywhere other than to maintain the current fees.
Thank you, Councillor Journeau.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I believe there's value. And yes, this is during COVID, but I think that if we're in a pilot project and we don't change anything, we're not learning and not picking up anything. So I'm going to propose an amendment to the motion that yes, we do waive the administration fee and increase the per seat fee to $50. This is in line with what has been presented by administration. I believe it reflects very fairly for the value that these people are going to receive, and provide some compensation to the overall value of our community and assist in a small way the other businesses that don't have the opportunity, or in fact may be losing because of the parking issue, the parking that's being removed in their neighborhood, which affects their business. So I'm proposing an amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Journeau. Councillor McGrath, I see your hand. I'm just struggling for a second. I will tell you what that struggle is. The motion to amend is not an amendment of the first clause. It just confirms the first clause. So we need not deal with that. But I'm not sure that that is a proper motion to amend when the motion was to eliminate the per seat fee, and you're amending that to say increase it to $50. I'm not sure that I can accept that as a motion to amend, and I turned to Mr. Given to see whether he can help me with that.
Your worship, my suggestion would be that your instincts are correct. Councillor Journeau's proposed amendment is exactly opposite of Councillor McGrath's main motion. So I would suggest that the main motion needs to be dealt with, and council members vote as they will. And subject to the outcome of that, a council member may propose a follow-up motion if Councillor McGrath's motion on the fees was not carried. If it was a slight adjustment to Councillor McGrath's main motion on fees, then perhaps you would rule that in order. But my suggestion would be that since it is exactly opposite, then council members should vote their conscience on the main motion and adjust accordingly based on the outcome of the vote on the main motion.
Thank you. And my thought as well. I will hear from you, Councillor McGrath, because it is your motion, but then I want to address the proposed motion to amend. Go ahead, Councillor McGrath.
Well, Mr. Given has spoken exactly what I was hoping to achieve, and to bring this motion to a vote and see where that leads us. And another councillor would absolutely be able to bring another motion forward. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Councillor Journeau, with respect, I find that your motion to amend is out of order, because in the first instance, it does not amend what is already there. And in the second instance, it does not amend it, it changes. So I am, unless there is further debate, I am going to call which I ended would be divided. So on the first part of the motion from Councillor McGrath, the motion is to eliminate the $100 sidewalk seating permit fee for 2021. So with respect to the elimination of the $100 sidewalk seating permit fee, all those in favor? Opposed? There are 3 on each side. That motion is defeated. With respect to the second part of the motion, which is a motion to eliminate the per seat fee for 2021. All in favor? Those opposed? There's 1 in favor and 5 opposed, so that is defeated. So we are back now. Councillor McGrath.
Thank you, Mayor Ireland. I missed my opportunity to close debate, so I'd like to just offer some closing remarks here. And I appreciate the perspectives that council shares, and I appreciate the opportunity, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to bring voices of residents and businesses forward to this platform by way of motion. I align with the fees being eliminated and feel very much that that was the right thing to do this year for 2021, but I appreciate the perspectives that council has expressed, and I am looking forward to further debate. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And my apologies that I did not call upon you expressly to close debate. My error. All right, we are now, I think, in a position where we have voted with respect to the elimination of the $100 sidewalk seating permit fee. I think under our procedural bylaw, we cannot reconsider that without a motion to reconsider. So I think that that is off the table, but we have yet to address the matter of what the sidewalk seating fee ought to be for this year, other than to say that it ought not to be eliminated. So I would entertain a motion with respect to setting the per seat fee for the 2021 year. Councillor Journeau.
I'm going to propose that the per seat fee be $50 as recommended by administration. So as I read it, there'd be no administration fee and a per seat fee as prepared by Mr. Given. This remains good value for the people who are going to be able to partake. It provides progress in a pilot project so we can find out, like the mayor suggested, maybe we want to postpone payment till the end of the year, but also provides fairness for the other businesses that are going to have to make some sacrifice, either because they can't participate or else they're losing potential business because the parking is being removed from their place. So that is my motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Journeau. Debate on that motion. Councillor Butler.
Sorry, thank you very much, Your Worship, but I feel, with all respect to Councillor Journeau, but I don't think the motion is in order. I think we already dealt with the question of eliminating the permit fee, and Councillor Journeau's motion suggests now eliminating the permit fee. And to me, that places the motion out of order. I think we just defeated a motion about eliminating the permit fee.
We have dealt with the question of eliminating the fee and determined that the fee would not be eliminated. I understand Councillor Journeau's motion to be not with respect to elimination, but to increase the fee. That is the per seat fee from.
Well, maybe we can ask Councillor Journeau
$25 to $50.
Sorry, maybe we can ask Councillor Journeau to confirm his motion. What I thought I heard was that he was proposing to eliminate the permit fee.
Go ahead, Councillor Journeau.
Thank you. I am proposing what is being recommended by administration. So it's no administration fee and a per seat fee of $50 per.
Well, thank you. And then I did misunderstand part of that. You are free, I believe, Councillor Journeau, to make a motion to accept recommendation number 2, but you are no longer free to make a motion with respect to recommendation number 1. That matter has been resolved. And if I misunderstood you, I apologize. Councillor Butler is right that with respect to the elimination of the $100 sidewalk seating permit fee, that is resolved. We can't have another motion on that, but we can have a motion with respect to recommendation number 2. So if your motion is limited to that, it is in order, I find.
My motion is limited to recommendation number 2.
Thank you. And Councillor Butler, does that resolve your issue? Okay, thank you. All right. I will propose, as I hope, a friendly amendment, Councillor Juneau, that your motion be to increase the sidewalk seating per seat fee to $50 and to defer payment of that fee until the end of the season, at which time applicants may apply to have the fee waived. And you did mention that it wasn't part of your motion, but you mentioned it in your comments. And I think that it is a valid consideration. We've deferred fees in the past. And I think that it might be fair and allow applicants, those who operate with seats in public space, to demonstrate at the end of the year whether or not they will or may suffer a hardship by the imposition of that fee. I'm prepared to add that if you are prepared to accept that as a friendly amendment.
I accept that amendment.
Any further debate with respect to that motion? That is then to increase the fee, but defer payment and allow applicants to demonstrate hardship before payment. Councillor McGrath.
Thank you, Mayor Ireland. A question for clarification, perhaps probably from administration versus debate. I am curious to see if a patron decides to not use the parking stall, if they should use the patio seating that they have used in the past. How does that leave them? Does that leave them paying the per seat fee in either regard, whether they use the parking stall space or the space directly out front of their commercial operation?
Your worship, to Councillor McGrath's question, I think the answer is yes. It would leave them paying the same per seat fee.
Thank you.
Councillor Gallagher-Empey.
I think it's too high. The restaurants and everybody last year, we gave it at $25. And I think we should keep it there for another year. It is COVID and we allowed it last year with the same caveat that they could pay at the end, defer the fee. I don't agree that we should eliminate fees, but I don't agree that we should put them up this year. I think we should keep it the same. I can support the increase, but I can support the same level as last year.
Thank you. Councillor Demota and then Councillor McGrath.
You know what, I was quite on the fence with the first motion to waive the seating fees. And, you know, Mr. Mayor, like a lot of my principles and, you know, feelings behind of like the equity to all businesses. And even when, you know, Councillor Juneau, you know, made point of the restaurants that can't physically partake in this, made more sense to me that we need to go, we need to at least maintain the fees. I don't feel at this time that it's appropriate to increase fees. We don't know where the province is going, you know, with restrictions. We've seen in a few provinces shut down indoor dining. So for many places, this might be the only opportunity. And yes, it might be an unfair advantage, you know, to a certain degree. I think maintaining is a happy medium, and going with last year's model, because it's maintaining our concept of the pilot project, and I think that it provides minimal hurt to everyone involved. So I appreciate the conversation, but I can't support an increase. That doesn't make sense right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Demota. Councillor McGrath.
Thank you very much, Mayor Ireland. I also cannot support this motion. It's a normal occurrence for me to step into a resident's business and see them in tears behind their desk. Right now is a challenging time to business owners everywhere, and I would never be able to vote with my best conscience in a way that goes against offering compassion and empathy to the people in this community that need our support. My values align with not increasing fees during a global pandemic.
Thank you for that. Councillor Butler?
Thank you. I'm concerned about conversation around this being a pilot project. This is not a pilot project at all. This is a temporary measure to deal with COVID. And that is in fact why I'm against increasing the fees. I have struggled throughout all of these conversations to encourage council to then we have to have that conversation outside of the question of COVID. We have to look at what is the financial impact to the community of taking up parking seats, and it's not $50 or taking up parking spaces. It's not $50. It would be much more. We have to have the conversation about what is fair and equitable between those businesses that are and are not able to take advantage of outdoor seating along the street because of their street frontage. That is a long, complicated, complex, and really important conversation. And this is not a pilot project toward that. This is, in my particular view, simply rolling over what we did last year into this year because COVID turned out to be 2 years and not 1. Let's hope we're not sitting here next year making the decision again because COVID turned out to be 3 years and not 2. So again, I know I'm repeating myself, but to me, the only thing that makes sense is to do what we did last year. So I'm not in favor of increasing the fees, and I'm very concerned about a sense that this is a pilot project for the future of outdoor seating in this community. I don't believe that it is.
Thank you for that, Councillor Butler, and thank you, in fact, for repeating yourself because some of us missed part of what you said early on. Your screen was frozen for a bit, but I'm quite confident that we have the full gist of your remarks now, and I do acknowledge that I was one who used the phrase in the nature of a pilot project, and I do think that there is some thought in the community that this could transition to something permanent, but I do accept your remarks, and it's perfectly appropriate to remind us that this began as a temporary measure, not as a pilot project, and I respect that, and I may have been responsible for somewhat changing that dialogue by improper use of words. So thank you for that. Councillor Demota.
Yeah, I too, and I apologize for using that. I understand the intent, and I guess I caught that wave, so I apologize for using pilot project.
All right. I may have lost track in my notes. If I see no other hands now, I will turn to Councillor Journeau. If you wish to close debate, Councillor Journeau, you're welcome to do that, and then I will call the question.
Well, by eliminating the administration fee, we've actually reduced the cost to the operators. And if that's the will of council, that's fine. There's still value obtained by these people who are using this opportunity. And the fee basically is a way to provide some balance for the other businesses. So I remain convinced that administration has done the correct homework. It compares very favorably with what's happening in other communities. And I continue to support my motion.
Thank you, Councillor Journeau. I will call the question. The question is that council increase or direct administration to increase the sidewalk seating per seat fee to $50 per seat, but the collection of that fee to be deferred until the end of the season, at which time applicants may apply to have the fee waived on demonstrated hardship. All those in favor of that motion? There are 2 in favor, opposed? There are 4 opposed. That motion is defeated. That leaves us then in position where both of the recommendations have been defeated. That is the elimination of the permit fee and an increase. That leaves us in the situation where we began the day. We don't need a motion to make no change. And so I would invite us to move on to the next agenda item, but I will allow some conclusion on this if it is necessary. Councillor Demota, and then Mr. Gibbon, I saw your hand.
Well, as far as what was proposed there in the recommendation, although there were 2 numbered options, there were other options available, and I think we've exercised one of those. So I think the one that's left is maintain the current fee structure, which I would be in favor of, and I will make a motion for that if need be. If not, and we would just carry on, then I would just like to clarify the start date and get that in place, just because I don't see that as part of the recommendation. I think we were just presented with that date, May 1st today. And maybe in the application process, that's where it's at, but I would like to move that up a couple of days if we're restricted to that. So I don't, if Mr. Gibbon can clarify, and then I can move forward.
Sure.
Go ahead,
Thanks,
Mr. Gibbon.
Worship. To the 2 parts, Councillor Demota's question, I think just on the report, it would be useful for council to receive maybe a motion to receive the report for information and reaffirm the current rate structure. That way the issue is sort of tied off nicely. You know, there's sort of there was a couple of motions that were voted up and down, and the issue was dealt with by council saying, okay, we get it. We had this report, and we've decided to stick with the current structure. That might be useful. Councillor Demota, to your second question, council may do whatever it wishes with respect to the timelines. I think I presented the administration's perspective on the amount of time. Frankly, administration would prefer that it starts later, that there is more time for applicants and for review of applications. But if council wishes to set the date, of course, that's at your discretion.
Councillor Demota.
Well, if administration prefers more time and we don't have a set date, then that's not restricting anyone to starting up tomorrow if they wanted to, if they had all their equipment in place and wanted to go. So I don't think that I'd want to move with that vagueness unless administration's comfortable with that, and then dealing with the applications as they come in. Because if somebody wanted to start on the 15th of April and had the opportunity and it ended up being 20 degrees outside, then they should be able to. But if you need a specific date, then I'm willing to make a motion in that direction.
So, Your Worship, for Councillor Demota, the date was not a part of the report because we're not looking to change anything. It is certainly within administration discretion to set that. Our advice is that May 1st is sort of a natural start date. Again, nearly a month earlier, actually over a month earlier than in Banff, given our northern climate and cleanup at the end of winter season, and the need to assess the applications as they come in. Administration's recommendation is for May 1st. Our preference might have been actually for later. I'm sure that's why Banff is a month later than Jasper, because they are taking more time, and maybe that's what they do with their development and planning authority. But administration would advise council this is a reasonable balanced approach. But if council wishes to set a different date, then obviously that's within your authority.
Councillor Demota.
Well, we might have a snowstorm on May 1st, right? As we could any day. However, to me, I don't like playing ping pong back and forth. I said that Saturday, is just a bad day to start if the weather's nice. So, and that's just from experience. So if we're gonna have a date, I would recommend to administration to consider the 29th. And I don't think that we should be dictating what administration's doing in that regard. To me, it doesn't make sense to start on a Saturday. And if Mr. Given was, I know they wanted to start a little later. I just feel silly making a motion because it's just, we're drilling way too down in the weeds.
Thank you. Mr. Given in his comments indicated that he might have a preference to have the report accepted for information and a motion confirming or reaffirming the current rate structure. Although I am inclined to think that it's not necessary. If it gives administration more comfort, I'm certainly prepared to entertain a motion to that effect, and then it resolves any question, I suppose, in the minds of the public. I think with doing nothing, we have effectively confirmed the status quo, but if there is some benefit to a motion, I would entertain that. Councillor Demota.
Sorry, I'd be happy to do that, just to keep continuity and clarity to the whole process.
All right, I will put words in your mouth, and I suppose words that I think came from Mr. Given, that you would make a motion that council receive the report on today's agenda for information and reaffirm the current rate structure. Okay, any debate on that? I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? There is one opposed. That is carried. Before we leave, just a tangential issue that arises. This matter was on our committee of the whole agenda, I guess it was, at least on an agenda on March 23rd. It was deferred because we ran out of time and had other commitments that day, and comes back for a decision on today's agenda. When it was on the agenda initially, I do not recall having seen much public response. It appeared again on the agenda on Friday last week. And over the weekend, I know that council received various emails, none of which are able to make it onto the public agenda because of timing. And so I would just invite us to go back and review on a timely basis, if we can, where we stand with respect to the receipt of correspondence from members of the community and how that might make it onto an agenda in a timely fashion. And for those members of the public who are watching today or may watch later on the recording, council did receive emails and has had those for consideration, but they are not yet part of the public record. And if you wish them to be part of the public record, let us know and we'll get those circulated. But from council's perspective, I think we need to readdress how this process can work more effectively to get public input on the record at the time when we're deciding issues. Not an issue for today, but I raise that as an ongoing issue, and it may be that that particular bylaw is currently under review by administration in any event. I can't remember where we left it, but something to keep in mind, I suggest. If there is nothing further there, we can move to agenda item 8.2, the operating and capital budgets 2021 to 2025. There is a long attachment. We had, of course, 2 days of lengthy, detailed debate in the last couple of weeks over the budget, both operating and capital budgets. I will turn it to you, Mr. Given, to again introduce the topic for today, but we'll see what time is then required to move through it.
Sure. Thanks very much, Your Worship. Well, as you said, lengthy attachment, but very short report. I think Council is well aware of the history stretching back to November of last year with the first public meeting presentations of the budget, where administration answered a number of questions and presented this publicly. Council also dealt with the utility rate bylaw and setting an interim budget towards the end of last year. And then, as you said, March 23rd and 24th, we had a full couple of days of meetings with a variety of motions, I think ultimately reflecting Council's strategic priorities and the compromises that actually are a part of the decision-making process among Council members. And the result is the budgets that you see in front of you. And to be clear, administration is asking for approval of the 2021 operating budget and the 2021 to 2025 capital budget. So to be clear, we're not asking for a multi-year operating budget. This is only a one-year operating budget approval. Attached to the package, you'll see the list of motions where there was healthy and significant debate in our March sessions, where Council debated the issues in some detail and made some changes to the budget. But I think the highlight really should be the focus on Council's decision to allocate $1 million in funding towards a tax credit to apply to municipal property taxes in the 2021 year, and also the creation of the $775,000 COVID relief reserve, which will enable Council to establish targeted supports for the types of Jasper entities, I'll say, maybe businesses, maybe residents, that Council determines are appropriate. Council should know that with the adoption of the budget today, you are enabling us to have that discussion. There will be further steps to come as administration would first come to Council for some discussions about the scope of a potential COVID relief program. And then we would take that scope discussion away and revise it into program options or alternatives for you to consider. But all in all, as Council will remember from the presentation, the per $100,000 of residential assessment rate that residential properties will pay is lower than any time since 2011, aside from the 2020 emergency action year that Council undertook. And so I think by and large, this acts on Council's priorities while acknowledging the realities of the COVID situation that we're in through the support of that $1 million property tax credit and the creation of that COVID recovery reserve, which will enable Council to do more actions as we move forward after the conclusion and adoption of the budget. And that's all I have to present, Your Worship. Your audio, Your Worship.
Thank you. I was entirely frozen out for a bit, so I missed the early part of your presentation. Barring any questions of Mr. Given or administration regarding the operating or capital budgets, I would welcome a motion, but if there are further questions, now is the time for that. Councillor Butler.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. Through to Mr. Given. You said, Mr. Given, that there had been some changes made to the budget through motions in our committee of the whole meetings. But unless I'm missing something, at least one of the changes that was made through one of those motions is not reflected in the presentation that we have in front of us. And that is the change to the operations budget with respect to some items in the public works and maintenance line items, and to the overall tax based implication of that budget. And so my problem is that I'm not seeing in the package exactly what the budget is that we would pass if we were to pass the budget. as proposed today. I'll point out that, so it's a two-part question. I'm not seeing that change in the numbers in front of us. And then the second part is, in all past budgets that we have looked at, there has been a consolidation showing showing the public the total, all the line items consolidated department by department. And for example, I'm looking at the 2019 budget here, and there are 3 pages which are entitled 2019 net tax envelope by department. And that is where somebody can look and see how it is that the net tax requisition is arrived at and what each department's contribution to that is. And we're not seeing that. So in my mind, when I pass a budget, that is really the core document that I look at and where I can take it to a residence and say, this is what we passed today. So I find myself a little uncertain as to what exactly are the numbers that we're being asked to pass today. So could we have a little clarity on that? Thank you.
Yes, Councillor Butler, through the mayor. First, I'll note that in the list of motions from Committee of the Whole, the very second one, motion number 101/21, that Councillor Butler amend Councillor McGrath's motion by reducing the amount of tax support from 2.7 million, and I'm rounding, to 2.6 million, is that motion that reflects the $100,000 reduction that was passed by council on a 4-2 vote. So that is administration is reflecting that there. What you're not seeing, and I think Councillor Butler, this is what you're getting to, the budget document has not been updated because administration, and in my judgment, there was the potential for council to make additional changes to the budget. If council did that, the exercise of adjusting the budget document would be wasted energy, frankly. We thought that it would be appropriate to reflect and acknowledge all of the changes that council made to the document by showing the motions that administration had captured them. So it is administration's intent to acknowledge that there is some significant work that goes into the preparation of the final budget document. And while council is still in their decision-making process and acknowledging that it is your budget and you have the right to make additional changes if you wish, we didn't see it to be of significant value to reproduce an entire detailed budget document when there was the risk or potential that there may still be additional changes. On the second, so that in terms of justification, we hope that we reflected that we did receive all of the direction from council by showing the motions. On the second part, Councillor Butler, I appreciate what you're saying. I've seen in other communities the presentation of the impact of the budget, which I think is what you're getting to. It really is only that it is the presentation of what does this budget mean. It is not the budget itself. And I've seen that stage happen as a part of public engagement for when tax notices go out, either with an insert that would show a pie chart that shows, you know, of your tax dollar, one tax dollar, this percentage goes to this department, this percentage to another department. So I think there are multiple ways to handle that, and appreciate that what you're seeing here is not the same as you've seen in the past. But I would suggest to council that that any of that presentation is possible. Once council has finalized a budget, administration would undertake those steps to support council with the information you need to share to the community what the budget means, which I think is just a different discussion than what the budget is, if I can suggest that. And we would be happy to provide council with information that you've received in the past about the tax requisition per department. That's absolutely possible. My suggestion would be that we do that once we have finalized the budget.
Thank you.
Councillor Journeau.
Thank you. In all fairness, the reasons not to change the document is rather lame. In today's technology, this is not difficult. We have given you instructions to remove items like generator from the library, but it's still in the document. I think it's up to administration to update the document if they want us to make a decision on it. And I'm very disappointed that that has not been done, because you're not redoing the budget. You're quite anxious to add new items since you printed it last November. When you show all these items that are new, I want to see a better picture before we, and this may mean a delay. And I'm very, very sorry about that, but I didn't create this. I think the administration has to present a better picture for us today. Thank you.
Councillor Keller-Hempe and then Councillor McGrath.
First of all, I want to apologize because I missed the operational budget. I was away last Wednesday morning. I have a question, and Mr. Given, you may not be able to answer this, and Ms. Melnchuk or Ms. Nadon might be able to if they remember. In 2019, actually, I'm going to go back to 2017, when we, as a council, we put funds into council's budget for administration help. When this was presented to us for the new communication officer, I was of the understanding that some of that expense came out of the budget from council. And when I look here, we have over 302,000 in 2019 as an expense, and we have 314,000 for 2021. Is the reduction in there from that administration position that we had put in there should Mayor Ireland need help? The conversations back in 2019 when we talked about the communications position, and even though we approved it in 2020, my understanding was that some of these funds would come from the council budget that we had slated for administration. I just want to know, did that happen, or it's all new money towards that position?
Councillor Keller-Hempe, I will stand to be corrected by Ms. Melnchuk, but I will say that as we look at the 2020 year, administration has finalized and will present shortly to council the year-end totals. And on the operational side, I don't believe that there was necessarily a reserve sitting of funds to be able to use. There may have been additional flexibility within the council budget to support that position, but of course that flexibility would be removed as we go into the 2021 year, because it now becomes a normalized position that would need to be regularly funded.
Thank you, Mr. Given.
Thank you. Councillor McGrath.
Thank you very much, Mayor Ireland. I feel like it's important to mention council conduct and remind council that it's extremely important to express our opinions, both respectfully and professionally when speaking to administration. We have spent many hours working on the detail of this budget, and we know clearly with the ability to see in our agenda packages what was passed and what was not passed by way of motion in the last 2 weeks. I am ready and able to present a motion if a motion is desired and ready.
Thank you, Councillor McGrath. A motion is desired and is ready. The motion, for simplicity, would be that council approve the 2021 operating and the 2021 to 2025 capital budgets as amended. And as has been discussed, we haven't seen the amended document. We have seen a list of the amendments. And if those are the amendments which are confirmed by motion today, then that document will be generated, and that's what we will have approved. If there are further amendments required today, then it's a different case. But that would be the motion to approve the operating and capital budgets as amended. And if you want to make that motion, I will certainly entertain that.
Yes, I move that. Thank you, Mayor Ireland.
And did you wish to speak further to that motion?
No, I think I've spoken lots in the last few weeks. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Demota.
As with the opportunity in the last item of discussion, I'd like to split that put a friendly amendment in there to split the motion, because I'm definitely ready to vote on the capital budget as amended today, because I think we did all that we could there, and you know, siding with Councillor Butler's concerns, and maybe some other concerns that I have as far as some answers that I couldn't get any questions on. I'm not ready to vote or pass, sorry, I'm not ready to pass the operational budget today. So I don't want to vote against it, but I'm just not ready to go forward with that. So.
Well, a request to split the questions is, I think, always in order, and it's not, an amendment is not required. So we can, in fact, when I call the question, call them separately. That is a motion to approve the operating budget separate from a motion to approve the capital budget, although you may want to consider whether you might want to make a motion to postpone the capital budget, or pardon me, the operating budget, but let's see how the balance of the debate goes first. Other debate with respect to the motion, which you can consider in two parts. Councillor Journeau.
Well, I think, in my opinion, that the motion approve the budget as amended is a bit wide open. I think we should have, and we have had in the past, the dollar amounts, the bottom line dollar amounts. I think it echoes a bit of what Councillor Butler has mentioned. And that's why I'm disappointed that the adjustments haven't been made, because I don't have a bottom figure. And I believe that that should be part of the motion.
Thank you, Councillor Journeau. Mr. Given, there you are. If we were to call a 15-minute recess, is that sufficient time to generate at least the 3-page summary document that was discussed earlier? Is that within the realm of possibility so that we can return to this today, or is that asking far too much of administration at this point to incorporate just the amendments that have previously been approved and nothing new?
Your Worship, can you clarify which document which 3-page summary you're referencing?
Well, it's one that doesn't exist, but was, as Councillor Butler indicated, part of the 2019 budget approval process. So simply a compilation of all of the department spending with a total. I presume it said, and I don't have it in front of me, but I presume it would have shown other sources of income and then the proposed tax requisition for municipal taxes. So a summary report, not the entire budget, but a summary with the numbers, so we can say this is the revenue stream, these are the expenses, and this is the tax requisition at the end of it all.
Your Worship, I'm sorry, I can't answer in the affirmative. No, I don't believe we'd be able to turn that around. You're referencing a document from 2019, which, you know, there isn't an existing version of it based on the 2021 sort of administration presentation. So we'd have to create that document from scratch. We'd use the old formatting, sure, but that would be creating it from scratch because we've gone through the 2020 year, which had significant changes, and now are on the 2021 year. Again, I think, you know, the changes to the operational budget are essentially the, you know, $100,000 less in the ops department. And then there are those changes to the capital budget, which are itemized in the council motions that are there. Administration certainly will incorporate those changes should council pass a budget. But at this time, yeah, I'm sorry, I wouldn't be able to do that in 15 minutes to produce that new document for you.
All right, thank you for that. Councillor Demota.
Well, I was just going to suggest to defer everything for 2 weeks then, and have a little bit more debate on some concerns next Tuesday, and not have a vote today.
Thank you, Councillor Demota. I appreciate that you may not feel in a position to vote today on the capital budget, or pardon me, the operating budget. But if there are matters that require debates, we are here for debate. And rather than just defer without even having a sense of what those matters are, I think is not a good use of our time. I can say, speaking to the motion, although I'm quite prepared, as you suggested, to call it as separate questions, I am in a position where I am prepared to vote on the budget today and to approve the budget on the basis that we had lengthy discussions as to the amendments we required. And I can do the math if I am so inclined. It's not typically my job, but I know what numbers we landed on. And even though I haven't seen them in any particular format, I am comfortable that the list of motions from the 2 days of sessions we had as committee of the whole reflect what council came to. And I would prefer not to defer. If there is a motion to defer, I will vote on that. But right now, there is a motion with respect to approving the budgets. And I, for one, am prepared to proceed with that. But if there are questions that you have about issues on the operating budget, at least let's use this opportunity to get those into the debate. Go ahead, Councillor DeBona.
Well, at our last meeting, I had brought up the discussion on some added positions that I don't recall passing, and if we did, like approve, I mean, you know, and I think one of them was regarding the turf management position and the safety officer. And it's not that I'm disapproving it. I just don't recall moving towards that, because when we were discussing these positions in the fall, they still hadn't been decided on. And I know that there were cutbacks due to, you know, because of COVID, and then the reduced tax requisition last year, it had some impacts. And therefore, you know, I was told that because of that, that those positions didn't come into place. And I don't recall. And if anybody else can, I went back looking to see where those were added, and I didn't see them. So I just need some clarification on those. And so that's part of my confusion. And then the fact that we didn't have numbers today that that gave a solid motion. I was still willing to pass the capital budget based on our lengthy discussions last week. And I thought we did have a number, as you said, like a concrete number after we had those proposed cuts, but those were moved for decision today as recommendations from committee of the whole. But I still need clarification on those other positions.
Thank you, Mr. Given.
Yeah, thanks very much, Your Worship. To Councillor Demota's question, as reported on March 31st, there were only 2 new positions proposed to be created in the 2021 budget. Those were the skilled trades position in the operations department, which there was some discussion on. Generally, we're calling it a plumber. And there was the motion related to withdrawing $100,000 of support from the operations budget, which will require administration to reassess the need for that position. There is the turf management position, which, as described on March 31st, was largely covered by an increase in revenue through the contract for services that the municipality has, I believe, with Parks Canada. And so those are the only 2 new positions. The health and safety officer position was previously approved by council, but not filled. And so administration is not proposing to create a new position there. Administration is proposing to finally fill the position that council created some time ago. And so there are only 2 new positions. There were only ever 2 new positions proposed in 2021. And council already reduced the operations department operational budget by $100,000.
Councillor Butler.
Thank you very much. I apologize. I somehow got kicked out of the meeting and have not heard all of the conversation that may have happened. So forgive me if I mention things that would suggest that have already been mentioned. I agree with Mayor Ireland's earlier point that we should not defer simply to defer. I think that if there are reasons that any of us are hesitant to pass either the operation or capital budget or both, that those reasons should be brought on the table, discussed, debated as necessary. More time on its own won't put us in a better position to consider this. I'm not objecting to passing the motion because the information that I queried is not in front of us. I have gone through and looked at the numbers very closely, and I can synthesize the table that we've talked about. My difficulty and my hesitancy is this, and maybe I'm suffering buyer's remorse because we agreed on a process over a week ago when we had the first of the two committee of the whole discussions. And the nature of that process was that we went department by department and we looked at each department's contribution to the net tax requisition independently and individually. And that's important to do that. However, it brings me back to something that I have been quite frankly harping on, and you're all tired of hearing me talk about it, that I have felt from the beginning of these budget conversations that the crux issue that we will face here is the size of the tax requisition. And that was why, going back some time, I was most interested in approaching this budget as distinct perhaps from some others in a little bit of a top-down process. Because I felt that what the community was going to be most concerned about is, well, as they always are, what are my taxes going to be? So we are where we are, and we got there through a process of giving fair hearing to each departmental request or proposal. But we are facing, and I don't have, again, we don't have the very specific numbers, but we are facing something in the neighborhood of a $9 million tax requisition here. And it is $1 million more than the comparative 2019 tax requisition. And one of the reasons that I queried not having that table in front of us is that that's where that becomes very clear. And that's in a table like that, and that is where each departmental contribution to that tax requisition is very clear for anyone to see. So I was comfortable, and I'm very cautiously comfortable with a tax requisition of that size in this budget. I have been convinced by Mr. Gibbons' argument, or it's not fair to call it an argument, but for him, with his pointing out that the tax requisition in Jasper has been sliding relative to the tax assessment. So relative to the tax assessment, our taxes in Jasper have been slipping. I have pointed this out on a number of occasions, and we have to deal with that. Jasper's taxes, we have to keep up with the increasing requisition, because the requisition is a reflection of various things, not least the wealth maintained in the property, in the community and properties, and that is directly linked to the commercial activity in properties. So I am satisfied that we do need a tax requisition, something like that. I was comforted because it is a considerable increase over 2019 as it stands in its raw form. Was comforted by the idea, and am, of applying $1 million of the most funding to reduce the impact of that in this year. Where I am having trouble is in two areas, and I'm sorry for going on, but I just can't seem to get it out in fewer words. I was also comforted by the fact that we had another $775,000 of available most contribution that we could look to apply to the next year. Because if we don't, then all we're doing is pushing off a really substantial tax increase from this year to next year and leaving at that for the next council to deal with. But now where we're at is a lot of conversation about targeted tax rebates or other kinds of uses of that approximately $750,000, which would mean it would not be available to address next year's tax increase because you can't spend money twice. And I'm really worried about that because sure, we can raise this year's tax rec to about $9 million, apply $1 million back against it, and this year's taxpayers will not be overly affected. But if we don't have that substantial reserve in place to mitigate the increase next year, then all we're doing is pushing the jump to next year. So I have a problem with being satisfied with this year's substantial tax increase if I don't feel that there is some mitigation available to next year. So that's one part of my concern. The second is this. As I said, I get the need to increase our taxes. I'm primarily motivated by the fact that we have a really substantial infrastructure deficit in this community. We've all talked about it. The pipes in the ground, the pavement on the streets, the sidewalks, it's all in need of work. Where I struggle is that we're also increasing in a year-over-year basis, and year-over-year in this case means since 2019, we're increasing the annual operating budget by about 13%. That's a lot. I don't really have a problem with a pretty high capital budget because a capital budget is rebuilt every year. A capital budget doesn't rely on the year before. But because of the incremental nature, always, it seems, of budget discussions, when we increase our operating budget in a given year, that increase is very, very hard to pull back from. And even though I sat through listening to the departmental proposals and voted against one or two of them, my problem is that in the end, it's still a pretty substantial increase to the operating budget at a time when we are pretty continually preaching the need for restraint. And our operating budget is considerably increased. And when we add $100,000 to an annual operating budget, that's $100,000 for years to come. Over 10 years, that $100,000 is $1 million because it seems nearly impossible to contract an operating budget. So I'm not sure I'm there to vote in favor of the budget exactly as it stands. I would need some comfort that we're going to use some of that most funding to cushion the blow next year as well. Or I probably feel like we need to find a way to shave perhaps a couple of $100,000 off of the annual operating budget, because I don't know that I can justify to the residents of Jasper that we have increased the operating budget, so what we spend to operate the organization for a year, by just under, as I take it to be without all the numbers in front of me, by just under $1 million. So that's where I'm standing. It's not that I need more time, but I need some certainty in one of those two areas before I'm going to be comfortable to pass this operating budget.
Thank you, Councillor Butler, Councillor Demota, and Councillor McGrath.
Well, I'm glad to hear Councillor Butler say that, and I'll keep it short because he's said a lot of sentiment that I've been feeling, and is just able to iterate it better. So thank you. And this is similar to the position I was in last year at this time when I was discussing looking at the overall budget and reducing that. And we have been preaching restraint. And and I don't want to come across as a pontificator. I just think that maybe that hasn't been received in the sense that I've wanted it to personally. Now, I can't speak for the rest of council, but you know, I'm not in favor of moving forward with a budget that has new positions in it right now, when you know, I've said before that there are many businesses and operations within the community that can't afford to bring on new positions within their own things. So I find it very difficult to ask for more money and then you know, add positions within the municipality. The needs are valid. I totally get it, but it's not the year to do it. So I would look at moving forward with some steps to lessen the burden of the, you know, requisition in the recommendations that Councillor Butler had suggested. And if there's a way to put that extra $700,000 in surplus from last year towards 2022, even though that won't be this council's budget, I would be more inclined to move in that direction. So if we can't come to a decision on that today, you know, maybe some sort of a revised plan could be in place and we can vote on the operating budget in a couple of weeks.
Thank you, Councillor McGrath.
Thank you, Mayor Ireland. I've been trying to crunch these numbers as you chaired the meeting, and I've landed on $18,644,577 would be what the last week's discussions ended in for 2021 capital budget for this year. I'm not 100% sure on my math with the operating budget, but I think it's around 8,900,000 because it was proposed around 9 million and we deducted $100,000 from the operating budget for operations. I'm wondering if administration can confirm the operating total number that we are discussing with this motion that has been presented.
I have a point of order.
Yeah. Go ahead, point of order.
I think we're confusing the operational budget with tax requisition again, and I just want to move away from that because one is one thing and one's the other. I'm sorry, Councillor McGrath. I just wanted to clarify. Thank you.
Thank you for that. There was a question from Councillor McGrath to Mr. Given, through Mr. Given to administration. Did you get that question, Mr. Given?
Your worship, yes. I might just need confirmation on the second part of it. Councillor McGrath's number on the capital budget is correct. Again, that is simply the total of the document that you see less the deductions that council made. And so that's correct. The one thing on the operational budget is council also chose to provide additional support for some external community groups. And so those would be reflected in the operational budget. And so there was the reduction of $100,000 that council made, and then council chose to increase operational support to a couple of community groups, and that's reflected as well. And so, but roughly very close there, yes.
Thank you. Councillor Journeau.
Thank you. I appreciate the effort that's made by Councillor McGrath to come up with some numbers, and that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for numbers. I'm looking at page 54 of our document of 83. So it's got revenues, expenses, and at the bottom it's got a net tax envelope. And I think that we should work towards those numbers and be very clear about what we are approving today. I'm not opposed to, I'm ready to approve a budget today because I think administration has to move on, and I'm fully supportive. But I want some clear numbers in front of me. I want to know what I'm going to be approving, and I appreciate Councillor McGrath's effort. I disagree with some of her numbers, so that's why I think we look at page 54 of the document. It's got revenues, expenses, and at the bottom it's got the deficit, which is turns out to be the tax envelope, plus or minus the amendments that were proposed in our committee of the whole motions. I think we can make a decision on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Journeau. That may be a very helpful reference to page 54. If I could, go ahead, Mr. Given.
Thanks, Your Worship. I just moved you all on screen, so I had to justify my my microphone. I know that council is looking for additional information. I want to thank Ms. Melnichuk, who was able to put something together that is maybe not exactly what Councillor Journeau was just referencing, but I think would meet what council is looking for. And I could put that up on screen if council wished to see it. We can see if this is, again, recognizing that this is a quick calculate, sorry, not a quick calculation, a considered calculation based on the decision-making that council engaged in over the last 2 weeks, and is subject to change if council chooses to do anything different. But I could put this up on screen, courtesy of Ms. Melnichuk, and I could describe what that means. Would you like me to do so, Your Worship? I
would, yes. I think that is with the consent of council. I see some nods.
So let's see if this, does everybody get that in front of them? So this is on the operating budget. Council can see here the 2019 net tax envelope, the 2020 net tax envelope, and the 2021 net tax envelope. So I think this may get to also what Councillor Butler was looking at. It doesn't break it out on a per, dollars per department basis, as I think has been done in the past. But you'll see that the 2019 net tax supported envelope totaled $7.982 million. In 2021, that number is $7.891 million. And the reason that it is less is because this is showing the application of the property tax credit. Given more time, we might represent this to you differently, but for council's information, this is how much the 7.891323 is how much we will ask property taxpayers in Jasper to pay in 2021. Now, but to be clear, that is that we are only asking them to pay that amount because we have the benefit of that $1 million tax credit, right? So just for everybody's clarity, and again, if administration had more time to refine this, we might have presented it slightly differently. But I think that this should get to the bottom line number of how much money are we asking taxpayers to pay in 2021? And the answer to that is 7.891323.
Thank you for that, Mr. Given. And just to confirm, that is based on the number of motions that council made as committee of the whole over the last 2 weeks. That's incorporating all of those.
Your Worship, yes, that's my understanding.
Thank you. All right, I don't know whether that is sufficient help. It gives us the tax requisition inclusive of the tax credit, the $1 million tax credit. I wanted to return briefly to comments first by Councillor Butler and then followed by Councillor Demota. We did pass a motion roughly a week ago, sitting as committee of the whole, to apply the $1 million tax credit and to put $775,000 into a 2021 COVID relief reserve. I acknowledge that we have not yet considered how that reserve may be spent. I understand that there are differences of opinion on how that might be most appropriately applied, but we have documented a reserve for COVID relief that could be applied to the 2022 operating budget, but not by us. I mean, we won't approve that budget sitting as this council, but that we have confirmed that that money is to be set aside in that reserve for COVID relief. So if Councillor Butler requires more certainty about how that will ultimately be spent, I don't think that is possible by this council at this time. Perhaps it could be. I'm not sure that we could earmark that in a really appropriate fashion and tie the hands of an incoming council. So it's potentially a matter to be argued, but for clarity for taxpayers, we can say that we have absolutely allotted $1 million for immediate tax relief by way of a tax credit, and we have established a reserve of just over $750,000 for further COVID relief. But that's as far as we can go on that. And if that requires then deferring decision until we make a decision, I don't know when that decision can appropriately be made, but I throw that out there. Councillor Demota.
Thank you for that. And because of you bringing that up, I'm just wondering if we need to make a motion to, as council, to put those monies in their correct spots, because we decided this as committee of the whole last week as a recommendation, and but we're not officially allowed to make decisions. So I'm just wondering where we're at with the million and the 7.75 in those regards.
Your worship.
Well, if we approve the budget as amended, we will have, as council, accepted the recommendation to have those numbers applied as we recommended as committee of the whole. Mr. Given, I cut you off. I apologize.
No, I'm sorry, Your Worship. I was going to say the exact same thing. Until council passes a budget, those numbers are subject to change. And so if council wishes to fix the tax credit so that property owners can know whether council did that or not, and if council wishes to set aside an amount of money in reserve, then council needs to do that by passing a budget.
Okay. So with that, looking at those numbers, and I thank administration, particularly Ms. Malinchuk, for getting that information to us. And thank you, Mr. Given, for posting it in that manner. When you look at the 2021 tax requisition, it being lower than actual than the 2019. And when I think about 2022, I have a huge level of anxiety just because of that springboard that's going to be needed to get to the right numbers that we need going forward. So, if any way we can somehow set something up so the next councillor has some success with the next budget, I'd be in favor of. But I'm not going to vote in favor of any operational budget that has new positions in it today. So if there's a way, I would like to see what the numbers would look like on the overall operating budget, and not the tax requisition, because I'm in favor of having that in place, and if not, maybe a little higher with that $1 million in there, and not having the 2 new positions added in the overall thing. Because I think that we could, as a council, look at decreasing the overall operational budget. I think it's heavy, like Councillor Butler had alluded to, and I would be more comfortable moving forward that way.
Mr. Given?
Your Worship, just to be clear, council did already reduce the operations budget by $100,000, and council administration reflected that in the motions there. Additionally, the turf management position, as I reported, the net cost to taxpayers is mostly offset, and I will get the confirmation of exactly how much. But the majority of it is offset by an increase in the fee-for-service contract that we have with another party. So the reduction of that new position for turf management would actually not provide a significant benefit to the operating budget, like in terms of a reduction of the operating budget, because it is majority offset by the increase in the revenue from parks. So there is no benefit to taxpayers of removing that position. There would just be a decrease in the level of service.
Councillor Demota?
Well, perhaps maybe I'm not being clear, or I'm lacking clarity. I'm okay with that. Mr. Given, through the mayor, I appreciate the discussion on those, and I appreciate the clarity on the positions that were already added on deciding. I was talking about the new ones that were proposed and clarified last week for 2021, and that's where I'm having difficulty moving forward.
Yeah, your worship, just for greater clarity for Councillor Demota, you said the new positions that were proposed last week, as reported last week, and again at the start of this meeting, there were only two. There was the skilled trades position in the operations department, and council reduced the operations department by $100,000, largely around the discussion of that position. And there is the new position in turf management, and the net cost, and again, thanks to the team for providing me with this, the net cost to taxpayers of that new position is $10,000, because all of the rest of the cost of that new position comes from the contract with parks. There are no other new positions proposed in 2021.
I think maybe I'm concerned about the semantics, because I keep saying I don't want to see new positions. This is just me personally. I'm not speaking on behalf of council, but the answer is we've reduced the operations budget by $100,000. That's not saying that we're not hiring a new person to fill that job. And I don't want to go forward with a play on semantics, I guess. And I'm not accusing anybody of working around the system, but this has already happened to us one time. And I just want to make sure that we're not going down the same path.
Thank you, Councillor Demota. Councillor Janot?
Well, I think in order to move this ahead here, I think we have a motion on the floor to approve a budget as amended. And I would just like to add to that, as amended, resulting in an ex-tax envelope of the amount that was provided by Mr. Given here a few minutes ago of $7,891,323. That provides clarity to the motion. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Councillor Janot and Councillor McGrath. It was initially your motion. You will accept that as a friendly amendment with respect to the operating budget to add that?
Yes, I accept and agree with that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think as well that was a call for the question, which I am happy to honor, although Councillor Keller-Rempe, you had your hand up before I intervened, so I will let you speak, and then I think I have been asked to call the question.
I just have a question to you, Mayor Ireland, to Mr. Given. The turf management position that we received money for a contract for, if we lost that contract, would we still maintain that position, or that position is tied to the contract?
Your worship, for Councillor Keller-Rempe, if we lost that contract, we would absolutely have to reassess the need for the position. One thing council should know that I've instituted is a vacant position review. So whenever a position becomes vacant, our administrative team reviews that position and assesses its need to see whether it continues to be needed, if the work could be done somewhere else. And I'd suggest that substantial change, like parks deciding to do grounds maintenance, would necessitate us having to do that kind of detailed review of the position. We would not keep a position if there was no work for it.
Thank you, Mr. Given.
All right, thank you all. We've all had ample opportunity to speak to the motion, and there has been a request firstly to divide the motion, and I indicated earlier on that I would accept that, and a motion to call the question. And so with division of the two parts of the motion from Councillor McGrath, I will call the first question: that council approve the 2021 operating budget as amended, resulting in a net municipal tax requisition of $7,891,323. That is the question. All in favor? Opposed? I have to clarify, I think there were 4 in favor and 2 opposed, but Councillor Kelleher MP, I hate to put you on the spot, but your hand was visible briefly and late.
I was opposed.
You were opposed. So that motion is defeated. That was a 3 in favor and 3 opposed. I will call the second part of the question, that council approve the 2021 to 2025 capital budgets as amended, and that as amended referencing the numerous motions passed by committee of the whole over the last couple of weeks. So I'll call that question. All in favor? Those opposed? There are 2 opposed, 4 in favor. That motion is carried. So we have now a capital budget. We do not have an operating budget. Is anyone prepared to make a motion to approve any other operating budget? If I may ask Mr. Given, through you to administration as necessary, working backwards, we need to get out tax notices by about the middle of June. In order to do that, we will need a tax bylaw, which will require 3 readings. Prior to that, we need a budget. And so working backwards, are you able to say what is the latest date council can provide you with approval of an operating budget?
Your worship, I would have to confirm just to be 100% certain, but I do know that we had set April 6th as administration's latest date. I'll check to see if there are any other legislated requirements that may get in the way, but I will relate. My understanding is that last year council approved the budget April 7th, and so I think that today's date is consistent with last year. I'm not sure how council felt about last year's budget, whether it was on time or late, but I think that this time where we are today is similar with what you did last year. And I can check to see if there are any other legislated requirements, but I will suggest to you that it is getting very difficult for administration to revise the budget and undertake all those steps that were required to provide appropriate notice to taxpayers. And that's why administration had targeted today to come to council for approval after those last 2 meetings over the last couple of weeks where council made decisions about the budget.
Thank you. I ask for that clarity. We next meet as council on the 20th of April, which is certainly getting late in the day, but that does not stop me from calling a special meeting of council if necessary to get this dealt with. But knowing those time constraints, if councillors today can indicate what exactly they might need to be able to make either a motion or a decision on a budget, I'd welcome that so we can move forward. Councillor Butler.
Thanks very much. Let me say that I've never felt so conflicted about passing a budget in the past, and I feel uncomfortable even now with having voted against a budget that I know has received a good deal of consideration. And I am anxious to be contributive and to contribute to solutions and not just vote against. So if I tried and wanted, in fact, to propose some amendments which would do what I had mentioned earlier, decrease, let me say, decrease the increase in the year-over-year operating budget this year, because as I've said, I'm very concerned with such a large increase year over year, albeit 2 years. But my internet is, I'm not getting internet. I can't look at the numbers that I need to propose some of those numbers. However, 2 weeks hence, I would be prepared to offer some potential amendments that would reduce the operating budget sufficiently to give me comfort. And if those were to fail, to then face passing the budget as it stands. I just couldn't make that happen in this meeting. It puts us in a little bit of a difficult position because we, of course, just defeated a motion to pass the budget. However, the question has been asked, what would we need? And what I would need to do would be propose some ways in which I think we could reduce the operating budget year over year. There are some ways. There are some places where I have discomfort with departmental increases in CFS, in EMS, and in culture and recreation, and a little bit in administration. I think it can be done. I think it's what is needed in this time. I'm sorry that we are so far against the wall, but to contribute to solutions, that's certainly what I would be prepared to look at if we came back to this in 2 weeks, so that we can have, I would say, pretty solid certainty of passing the budget 2 weeks hence.
Thank you for that. Any other comments? All right, if not, we will conclude agenda item 8.2 for today. I appreciate Mr. Given. That creates some concern I am going to anticipate for administration, but that is where we are at, and we will have to proceed expeditiously with the remainder, although we have in the past had success having the superintendent certify a bylaw, and there is zero chance that an operating budget interferes with Parks Canada's authority. So we might be able to get approval on the same day and do 3 readings in 1 day. So that would save some time. But in any event, that is where we are at today. Councillor Butler?
In my view, the only pressing issue in completing the operation budget from the broad standpoint is the need to send out tax notices. And there is a lot of latitude into when tax notices need to go out. We traditionally try to get them out, I think, in May, but legislatively, there is actually no real rush there. And I want to point out that the organization is operating under an interim budget. So it is not that the organization doesn't have a budget to operate under. So circumstances have dealt us this. We were ready to deal with a budget late in 2020. There has been a lot of change since then, including not least, and to our very good fortune, the addition of Mr. Given into the program. So these things just take time. But to me, this is a seminal budget. It is a critically important budget for what it takes us to get it done in a way that a majority of councillors are satisfied with is 2 more weeks. Then I don't think we are putting the organization or the community into any kind of uncertain footing. Thanks.
All right, thank you. We will move on to agenda item 9, a request for a proclamation with respect to Volunteer Appreciation Week. typically, if council is so inclined, that would take, I think, a motion. I don't see that a motion is prepared.
Sir, Ms. Nadon has her.
But oh, yes, thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Don.
Thank you, Your Worship. I can speak briefly to this item. This is a request penned by Jeanette Marcoux from the Jasper Employment and Education Center, but it's representative of a committee that was formed to work together on initiatives for Volunteer Appreciation Week, which is coming up later in March. And there is a request for proclamation in the letter, but there's also a financial request of $500 to support advertising for the initiatives. And since the municipality is not in a position to conduct its usual activities that we would have with the Volunteer Appreciation Banquet and other items of that nature, we've provided a staff member to participate in the committee. And this opportunity of sponsorship, if you will, from council for $500 would go to support. The main item that they're working on is launching a Facebook page, I believe, to gather volunteer opportunities in one spot and to have it be run by community nonprofit organizations in the future. And my understanding is that the advertising dollars would go towards launching that specific initiative. So the request is twofold, is my understanding. So a request for proclamation, but also a request for financial support.
Thank you for that. Comments from councillors? Councillor McGrath?
Well, thank you. And thank you to Mrs. Marcoux for bringing this forward and having this on our agenda. And I apologize that we haven't seen this with enough time. It was on our agenda to be discussed 2 weeks ago, and we unfortunately didn't get to it. So volunteerism in our community is certainly what makes our community thrive and vibrate at the frequency in which it does. And if we didn't have the volunteers that we have, our community would certainly be lacking in many regards. So I would be happy to move this forward, though it is a mayoral proclamation. Mayor Ireland, I'm not sure how you feel if you need assistance to move this forward while you're chairing the meeting. I'm happy to make a motion both to allocate $500 to this initiative and also to proclaim that April 18th to 24th, 2021 is National Volunteer Week.
Thank you, Councillor McGrath. I may not have caught it. Did you reference the $500?
Yes.
Gift? That was part of your motion. Thank you.
Yes.
All right. I do think that we do need a council motion, and it's a slight matter. I would prefer a slight amendment so that it is clearly a proclamation for Volunteer Week, and that the final sentence say that I, as mayor, on behalf of council, do hereby proclaim. I think it's important that this be a council initiative as opposed to a mayoral initiative. But with that slight amendment, I'm certainly supportive of your motion that we so proclaim and contribute the $500 that was requested, the donation. Other comments? Seeing none, I will call the question. All in favor? There are none opposed. That is carried. So thank you for that, and thank you to Ms. Marcoux for bringing that forward. Is there any new business for council? I'm seeing shaking of the head, and I'm not going to allow much time for reconsideration. Councillor report. Oh, are you on to councillor reports, or is it new business, Councillor McGrath?
Sorry, just really quickly in new business, I think that it's important that we revisit some conversations that we had last year, more so in relation to pedestrianization of the downtown core. I know that time is of the essence and it is already April. I'm curious, and I want to plant a seed with council to see if council is interested in perhaps surveying the community, engaging the community in some way to see if this is possible for this year. I know so many people in our community really desire a possible closure of Patricia Street to increase the town's vibrancy. And I'm not saying that we should do this, but I would love to engage the community on this in a timely manner to see if anything can be done in the 2021 summer to pilot or try or attempt to see and feel what this experience would be like for the community of Jasper. It's just a seed.
Thank you for that. Councillor Demota.
Well, on that topic, members of the Culture and Rec Board, without steering from me, had got together and want to have a special meeting tomorrow afternoon, discussing what Jasper Days could look like. And initially, when we started the discussion, I kind of took my foot off the gas pedal a little bit because there was sentiment from council that it should be a grassroots thing and grown organically from the community. So I left it at that. And, a few months ago. And so some people got together and they have some ideas and they want to come forward and have some discussion. So I'm more than happy if anyone in this conversation today wants to participate in that tomorrow and see what comes out of that, and maybe that could be part of something bigger. I like where you're going with this one, Councillor McGrath, and I think it's worthy of conversation. And if it's two separate things or not, that's fine too, but I think it's a good direction.
Thank you. Seed planted, I think, Councillor McGrath, thank you. Agenda item 11, are there any councillor reports for today? Councillor McGrath?
Tomorrow I will be attending a community conversation and Thursday will be part of the Municipal Inclusion Committee.
Thank you for that. Further reports? I see none. Upcoming events. I see we have another Zoom call in 11 minutes. So it'll be a quick lunch, or we'll start perhaps a little bit late on that. Thursday is a general meeting of the Jasper Chamber of Commerce conducted by Zoom for those who might be interested in attending that. We have a Strategic Priorities Committee meeting next week, a week from today. And for those who have so signed up, the Alberta Urban Municipalities Municipal Leaders Caucus is held next Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. A couple of hours each day is my recollection for those who are signed up for that. If there are no other upcoming events to bring to the attention of council, I will ask for a motion to adjourn. Councillor Demota, thank you. I won't call the question until Mr. Given gets a chance to speak.
No, Your Worship, I was just going to ask, not everybody that's on the Zoom will, just in terms of upcoming events, our 1:30 meeting, would council just like now to say that we should start that at 2 o'clock? I think that'll still give us enough time to have the initial discussion that we wish, and just so that we get that out of the way, we're all here still on the call rather than trying to do it by email afterwards. Is that appropriate for you?
Is there any objection to starting that at 2 o'clock? I see none. Perfect, that shall be done. Do we already have a Zoom link for that?
Your Worship, let me just check the calendar to see if there was a Zoom link. Yes, there is.
Okay.
It should be in your calendar.
It will remain the same. We will just start at 2 o'clock. All right, thank you, Councillor Demota. You made the motion to adjourn. All in favor? There are none opposed. That is carried. Thank you all. Thanks again to members of the public who tuned in today to watch our proceedings. Always appreciative of those people who take that time. So thank you all very much. And I will see the rest of you in half an hour and others, I suppose, a week from now. Thanks.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.